Mr. Mayor, we're at 5 o'clock. Are we ready to begin?
We are.
Recording in progress.
Oh, I just need to wait for that message. Good evening and welcome to the regular meeting of the Petaluma City Council and the Petaluma Community Development Successor Agency for Monday, October 21st, 2024. If you wish to provide a public comment on tonight's agenda, please fill out a speaker card. They're in the back of the room, and bring it to our city clerk, who's in the front of the room. And now I'll invite Monica Aparicio and Maria Galvez to provide information to those who wish to participate in Spanish tonight.
Thank you. Good evening. Hola, me llamo María Galvez y estoy aquí con mi pareja de interpretación, Mónica Aparicio. Estamos hoy aquí como intérpretes. Hoy este evento se llevará a cabo en español e inglés. Se usarán ambos idiomas activamente, así que usted podrá elegir un canal para participar en su idioma preferido después de que le hayamos explicado cómo funciona la interpretación. Estaremos usando la función de interpretación de Zoom. Después de que termine esta explicación, se activará la función de interpretación. Si usted está conectado con su computadora, usted verá un icono de un mundo en la parte inferior de su pantalla. Si está conectado con una tableta o con el teléfono, pulse en Más y verá un menú que incluye la opción de interpretación de idiomas. Para escuchar la interpretación, pulse el icono del mundo o interpretación de idiomas. A continuación, elija su canal de idioma.
We are ready.
And may we have a roll call for the evening, please?
Barnacle?
Present.
Cater Thompson?
Here.
Healy?
Here.
Now?
Here.
Posake?
Here.
Shribs?
Here.
McDonald?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to invite our friends of the Girl Scout Troop 10562 to come forward onto the dais here to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance tonight. And now a moment of silence. Looking up and down the agenda, the dais to see if we have any changes requested in the agenda this evening. Seeing none, we'll move right into it. We have a proclamation, a couple proclamations tonight, and the first one is for Dia de los Muertos. I'd like to invite Abraham Solar, Margot Gallagher, and Gloria McAllister of the Organization for Dia de los Muertos to the podium and then provide comments. Whereas El Dia de los Muertos Petaluma is a memorial celebration from Latin and South America when loved ones who have died are welcomed back as honored guests between October 31st and November 2nd. Whereas El Dia de los Muertos Petaluma is a non-profit cross-cultural organization that has planned citywide celebrations of El Dia de los Muertos in Petaluma since 2000. And whereas the celebration of El Dia de los Muertos builds bridges between communities in Petaluma and provides opportunities to remember in community loved ones who have died. And whereas by honoring those who have gone before us in the arts and cultures of Latin and South America, we honor our shared humanity. And whereas residents of all ages and all cultures and ethnic groups are finding Petaluma's celebration of El Dia de los Muertos to be comforting and engaging. And whereas through the celebration of El Dia de los Muertos, Petaluma, the community is united in providing cultural offerings citywide. Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Kevin McDonald, Mayor of Petaluma, along with the members of the Petaluma City Council, do hereby proclaim October 1st to November 2nd in 2024 as El Dia de los Muertos Petaluma 24, in recognition of the cultural contributions of Latin and South America and the human need to honor loved ones who have died, and the importance of building community to improve the quality of life for all residents in Petaluma. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, gracias. Gracias to all of you for this most wonderful gift. We are very grateful. And we really appreciate the fact that you are telling us that this is an event, that it is welcome and beneficial for our community. And we all need it. This is like it says right here, it is a bridge. And we all can celebrate our commonality of grief and the loss that we all unfortunately have to go through. This Saturday, we're having our grand finale of celebration in front of the museum on Kentucky, and we're closing Oda Street. We hope to see as many of you as possible, and help us, and we help you celebrate those that you've lost and honor them and continue remembering them because they are still with us and we miss them. Thank you so much on behalf of El Dia de los Muertos Petaluma, and we're just going to continue celebrating. Gracias a todos.
Just real briefly, and just thank you to all of you for the support that the city gives to us. It's very meaningful, and we feel it and we appreciate it. And in particular, thank you to Mayor McDonald for showing up at our events and really just showing that you care. And it's been wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you. And please go through downtown. We have altars in the downtown windows. We've got 2 community altars and a really big fun event on the 26th and a procession as well. So we welcome all of you.
Please come.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Also tonight, we have another proclamation. It is for Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and I invite Allison Abbott of the YWCA Sonoma County board member to the podium. Whereas the city of Petaluma recognizes that domestic violence affects 1 in 4 families in our local community, and that nearly all of us knows someone who's been abused. The crime of domestic violence violates an individual's privacy, dignity, and security based on the systemic use of emotional, physical, sexual, psychological, and economic control or abuse. And whereas established in 1976, the YWCA Sonoma County is our community's singular and vital resource for local residents experiencing violence in the place, we should all feel the most safe inside our own homes. YWCA operates Sonoma County's only confidential safe house shelter and Sonoma County's only 24/7 domestic violence crisis hotline. The YWCA Counseling Support Services offer trauma-informed individual and support group therapy for victims of trauma and domestic violence, including the students at YWCA's therapeutic preschool serving one of the most vulnerable populations, children ages 3 to 5. And whereas only an informed community effort will end the cycle of violence for local families, members of our community are encouraged to participate in YWCA's scheduled events and programs to raise much needed funding to support their vision for every family in Sonoma County to live healthy, productive lives and be safe in their own homes. Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Kevin McDonald, Mayor of the City of Petaluma, on behalf of the entire City Council, do hereby proclaim October 2024 in Petaluma as Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening. Domestic violence is not in a bubble. It affects us all and people that we know. And sometimes it is in a bubble because sometimes people don't come forward and talk about it. And it's a very serious issue that we're hoping to eradicate to the best of our ability, or at least support families, children, and those who are in need. My name is Allison Abbott, and I am the board chair for the YWCA. I have the distinct honor of serving going on 4 years now. So I am looking for a replacement in 2 years if anybody's interested. But on behalf of all of the board directors, the staff, the volunteers, and especially the local families who we do serve, the YWCA wants to sincerely thank you for making October Domestic Violence Awareness Month. This is my second year getting the proclamation, and I am just so honored to be here again. And I'm hoping you'll indulge me with a picture. Yeah.
Certainly.
Thank you. We can do a selfie. That works. Yeah. Yes, please. Oh, great. Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And now for general public comment. And let me note that during general public comment, the public is invited to make comments on items of public interest that are within the City Council's subject matter jurisdiction and that are not listed on the current agenda. Public comments are limited up to 3 minutes per person, and depending on the number of persons wishing to address the City Council, time may be allocated in equal shares totaling no more than 20 minutes. And have we had general public comment, emails, and et cetera?
We have received 10 general public comments, and those are posted on the website. And at this time, I will start a 30-second clock for general public comment. Members of the public attending in person should bring their speaker cards to the clerk's desk if they have not already done so. Speakers are reminded to be respectful in their comments and that this meeting is being translated. Please pause between sentences for translation.
Tonight we have 4 cards submitted. The first is from Sandra Shand, and the second is from Adina Flores. Please feel free to come to the podium.
Thank you. It's hard to know where to start. The folks in Petaluma who are of Jewish heritage and Palestinian heritage continue to be troubled, continue to lose loved ones. I hope that you could see after tonight's presentation that human rights should apply to everyone, including Palestinian families who should have the right to feel safe in their own homes. I simply cannot, in my soul, accept that killing children is self-defense. It just does not sit with me. And I think that a lot of people in this country think this started in October. It did not. There is a well-documented history, extensive research by the New York Times Magazine, documenting many cases of misdeeds against Palestinians
by the Zionist settlers. Things from stealing livestock, assault, and arson, where not a single suspect was charged with a crime. In one case, a settler shot a Palestinian in the stomach while the Israeli Defense Forces soldier looked on. They questioned the shooter for 20 minutes and never considered him a criminal suspect. During our review of the cases, these researchers said, we listened to Israeli human rights activists. They interviewed former military leaders. This was not anti-Semitism, these reports. The violence over decades against Palestinians, which is never brought to the justice system because this is an apartheid state. There is not one kind of justice. Silence, avoidance, and abetment by Israeli officials. If you brutalize a people, steal their land, kill them, hurt their children for 50 years, there will be some blowback. I don't approve of what happened. I wish everybody would use diplomacy instead, but we need to understand that peace makes peace. Violence makes violence, and it's our bombs and our tax dollars that are killing those children. And I don't care what you call it. It's wrong.
Thank you. Adina Flores, to be followed by Patricia Tuttle-Brown.
Good evening, Council. I am here this evening because I would appreciate a very public apology from City Attorney Danley, who lied on record at the last Council meeting. He went on to say that all fair political practices complaints against Councilman Barnacle have been dismissed, and that is a blatant lie, which appears to be election interference at this point. I then had people berating me publicly on Nextdoor because of the comments that your City Attorney made. So, for the record, there is still a complaint open. There's 2 complaints open that Mr. Barnacle is very aware of. One because he did not report income from Energy Solutions. He also did not report income from Outthink LLC, and that income was notated on the Form 990 for the Building Decarbonization Coalition. And so I did notice, per the response I received from the FPPC, that Mr. Gary Wynick is speaking on his behalf. Mr. Wynick is the former chief of enforcement for the Fair Political Practices Commission. He was also hired by Supervisor James Gore, our county supervisor, who's been under investigation since 2022 due to the sworn complaint that I submitted. And so I would appreciate a very public apology that is necessary at this point in time. I'm not here to just bash the council. That is not my intent. I am here for transparency. I did see that regarding the most recent meeting with the overlay decision, I believe it was Councilwoman now, Mr. Healy and Mr. Shribs that voted against the overlay, at least the environmental impact report. So I do appreciate that greatly. Your community has expressed that they are very concerned by the decisions being made on their behalf. And to refer back to Mr. Danley, I'm not sure why commenters were told that there was no applause allowed following comments. There was a white man who clapped very loudly to berate me after your comments, and that was allowed. So why is it allowed to berate women of color? I would just like to know. This is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I am a survivor of domestic violence. Mr. Barnacle, I don't appreciate your sentiments during debates in which you claim women have been beat up. That is so insensitive. I've been strangled. I've been kicked. I've been held upside down and threatened for people to drop me from second stories. So your comments are completely insensitive. Like, I don't know what you're thinking. You should not be sitting at the dais. I was going to protest against Mr. Barnacle on Sunday because he was having an event to speak to stakeholder inquiries as one of the most educated individuals on local issues, he decided to cancel that event because I emailed Petaluma police to let them know I'd be exercising my First Amendment rights. I do so every single time I show up because the Democrats, being the racist individuals that they are, called the police and then try to paint a picture that isn't valid every time I show up. So please do the right thing, and Mr. Danley, you owe me a public apology. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Patricia Tuttle Brown, to be followed by Catherine Reinhardt.
Okay, don't start the clock yet. Okay. I was hoping I could get my husband's 3 minutes, but apparently I can't, which means I have to talk really fast. So here I go. I would like to say, I'm speaking about the hotel, but there are also 4 other issues that I think are completely intertwined. And I think it's important to realize that they're all really one thing, and they relate to the identity that we feel about Petaluma, not just people like me that go back a long time and don't really feel very snooty about it, because who cares where you were born, really. But the hotel is bringing up a lot of feeling because it relates to tarnishing what we hope is a beautiful historic downtown. And so it's connected. The GPAC committee already has the overlay. When I went to the meeting, I said, is that the overlay? The first of 2 land use meetings. The overlay was already there. And I said, should that really be there? And they said, well, the very nice consultant I was sitting next to said, well, the council voted. So I thought, well, gee, I mean, it isn't really totally accepted yet, is it? But there are 3 other things about being a Petaluman, whether you just moved here because it's a beautiful place and we still hang on to our history, our Green Hills, our ranchers. The people that when my daughter was in high school would be called Hicks because there's not a lot of respect. The fairgrounds is an issue that I wrote a 3-page essay about, saying we really need to respect what the lottery committee did before it was morphed after it had its recommendations. The recommendation was number 1, agriculture, number 2, emergency preparedness. Emergency preparedness did not mean in any way a fire station or a police station. The committee said that it was going on what the guy who was the emergency preparedness guy who was for the county that was just retiring, he said the reason the fairgrounds was valuable was because it was empty, not because it had buildings that they were utilizing, although it could use more bathrooms and stuff. So it's been morphed into a police and fire station. That is wrong. My view is it started out a park, but also Marin, Sonoma, fairgrounds. We need to support our farmers, and that moves to the next issue that's wrapped up in our identity. And I don't mean our identity that some of aspects of when I grew up, there was a lot of racism, there was zoning that was exclusionary. I don't mean those things. I mean the blue-collar people being respected and the farmers being respected. And we all eat. And I think sometimes we forget that. So Measure J, I'm voting no, but it's not that I think everything's perfect on every ranch. But what I feel like is that what we need to do is love each other and the farmers. And the fairgrounds could be a venue for promoting technology that farmers need in order to allow themselves to get rid of the waste material and not pollute the creeks. The last is Point Reyes ranches. We ought to be able to have ranches that are ecological for the same reason we ought to be able to have farmers not polluting the creeks.
Your time has expired.
So that's my last.
Thank you for getting it all in under the 3 minutes. Good. Let's see, Catherine Reinhardt to be followed by Sheila Baker.
This probably doesn't look too good. Okay, I'm ready. Good evening, Mayor, City Council members, and Ms. Flynn. For the record, although I think you all know who I am, I'm Catherine Reinhardt, a Petaluma resident, local historian, author, and historic preservation advocate. I'm here to share information about a new book and upcoming event that may be of interest. With your permission, I'd like to provide the city clerk with complimentary copies of this book. This book is The Petaluma River, a sketch journal and brief historical overview to give each of you.
acceptable. And I don't think they're in order by council member. I know this seems a little unusual, but here was an opportunity to get all of you, well, except for one council member, and the city manager in one place at one time. This book is a compilation of sketches, photographs, historic images, watercolors, maps, and research that document the past, present, and vision for the future of the Petaluma River and the surrounding area. I am pleased to have collaborated on this exciting project with artist and architect Alan Butler. The book is available for purchase at the Petaluma Museum, Copperfields, Usher Gallery, Riley Street Art Supply, and online. Proceeds from the book sale will be donated to the Petaluma River Park and the Friends of the Petaluma River. Our first official book launch will occur at the Petaluma Museum on November 9th at 5 p.m. I hope to see you there and that you will not hesitate to share the news of this publication and the event with your friends, family, neighbors, and constituents. Thank you.
Thank you. And our last speaker tonight is Sheila Baker.
Hello, everyone, and no Anjay. Okay, I just came to speak tonight because I listened to the Lausian forum on Friday at home, and I noticed a remark that Councilmember Barnacle had made regarding the January 2023 council meeting item on the Midpin project at East Washington Street. And Councilmember Barnacle thought it was just terrible that Councilmember Healy voted no on it. Turns out that no was the correct vote. Sorry to have to say, but the apartments not all of them had parking, and that's not really very good. Okay, less than 50%. This is a workforce project, 60% AMI. That means workers, that means families, that means people that have to get to work, have to get the kids to school, babysitters, shopping, and no transit is not going to handle grocery shopping. And so I just wanted to say that I am in complete agreement with that no vote for that particular meeting, and I'm so sorry that 6 of you voted yes for it, because I can't even believe that anyone would think that you can throw away your keys as a family and get away with not having a car. You just can't. And, well, I have to admit that I did vote for Councilmember Healy for that reason and a couple of more reasons. And that was the third time I voted for him. So I think you're wonderful. Yay. And thank you for supporting affordable housing always, Councilmember Healy. Thank you.
Thank you. And that closes public comment, general public comment for the evening. And we now move to council comments for the evening. And I'd like to start with our Vice Mayor Shribs.
Okay, so there was a few meetings this last couple weeks. And I just came from the Petaluma Wetlands Alliance board meeting, and I found out that there is a brand new kiosk that the Alliance, Petaluma Wetlands Alliance folks worked with the city, and both financially and providing text and information and pictures. And now there's a whole set of 11 brand new kiosks over at Ellis Creek Recycling Facility. And so there's going to be a sort of like celebration of that on November 9th at 3 p.m. There'll be a group walk looking at all the kiosks, and everyone's invited to join in on that. On the Ag and Open Space, I was at a meeting. I'm now on the grants committee, where we are recommending between $3 and $4 million to be spent on urban parks throughout the county. Petaluma is not one of them, and Petaluma does have 3 allocations right now, 2 for $1 million and 1 for $2 million, that are not spent yet. But given the criteria, I think we can be up for another option. But we do need to spend the $4 million this year in order to get our next allotment, which is very possible. So there's $3 million allocated this year, and there'll be another $3 million next year so I'd like to get in queue for that. So anyway, went to the River Park celebration yesterday, and from what I saw, that would actually rate very, very highly on the ranking criteria that I saw in the grants program. I was also at the Generation H Summit recently, and of course that comes down to housing is our number one need, especially affordable housing, but all types of housing is needed, is the conclusion that we were given. In the North Bay Watershed Association, I'm now also on the Grant and Scholarship Committee meeting, and then there's several $100,000 that we're looking at as possibilities for small project grants and scholarships for interns who might be interested in working in the watershed field. So that might be coming down, so people can start thinking about maybe some small grants for watershed education and watershed work and projects. There's another webinar on carbon dioxide removal from the environment put on by the Climate Center here in Santa Rosa that invited folks from pretty much all over the world. And in that webinar, there is a worldwide effort to look at carbon removal from the atmosphere, as well as eliminating it from our processes through reduction in emissions. And it just turns out from the webinar, the basic conclusion there is we have to work on our natural systems for carbon removal, which would be far superior to mostly the industrial, is the conclusion I came from that. But we still need to reduce our emissions production by at least 80% just by doing better changes of behaviors and the like. So that's the conclusions from that webinar. And that's it for me for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Cater Thompson.
Yeah, I was at the League of California Cities last week for 3 days, and it was a good conference. And housing, of course, was a big topic for all cities. And I just want to say that not every housing project is perfect, but when you're living in low-income housing and opposing low-income housing for others, that's an issue for me. Because it's good for me, but not for somebody else. And not every project is going to be perfect. And so I just want to state that. And my Sonoma County Transportation Authority meeting, we're just talking about the future of where transportation is going to go. And it's about, the active transportation plan and, how we're going to actually move in this county in the next, 10 to 20, 30 years. And that is different modes than just cars. We're going to have to live with SMART is going to be a big part of that transportation, but it's really the active transportation plan so people can go at different modes of transportation to get to where you want to go. And I have my water meeting this week, and so I'll talk about that next time. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Barnacle.
Just one update that's in addition to some of the other things that's already been mentioned was at the grand opening of the Hall of the Above, which was a fantastic event. There was over 1,000 people that came through the doors that day, and it's just really exciting to see that beautiful old building being used again. Thanks.
Councilmember Healy.
Thank you. So I was also at the League of California Cities annual conference in Long Beach last week, and that was the reason why, unfortunately, I couldn't participate in the Los Cien candidate forum. They had originally told me that the District 6 candidates would be on at 7 o'clock, which would have allowed me to join by Zoom, but they moved that up to a time that conflicted with the North Bay Division's annual business meeting. And but at that business meeting, I was reelected and then sworn in as the North Bay Division's representative on the Cal Cities Board of Directors. And I think I've mentioned this before, but I'm the first Petaluma official to serve on the Cal Cities Board since Helen Putnam. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Now.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Each October, women are reminded to put themselves first and make time for their health. I am wearing pink to remind everyone, including men, but especially women, to be screened for cancer. We have lost some amazing individuals to this terrible disease, and thank Pink, and I'm proud that our fire department is got pink thread on their shirts this month. So thank you. At our last Parks and Recs meeting, we heard a wonderful presentation by staff regarding to some exciting activities and events taking place at our fairgrounds. Luma Ice and Pickleball. Setup of the ice rink will begin in November, and in December, on the 11th, it will have a soft opening with food trucks and vendors. Luma Ice will be open for drop-in skating and more through January 7th. If you want more information, including sponsorships, you can go to our city website. Our park staff is really feeling pretty sad due to the recent fires that destroyed a lot of their equipment. If you see any city park staff, please reach out and tell them what a great job they're doing, and you share their loss. We also heard a presentation from Relief regarding a 4-phase tree planting in the Denman Reach area, beginning soon and through winter of 2025. There was no Airport Commission meeting this month, but come out and have a meal at 29er Diner and watch aviation activities. I attended a few local school carnivals over the weekend, a great family fun, and I want to thank everyone, the families and school staff that were involved. And on Saturday, I attended the 6th annual Garrett Piez Scholarship Fundraiser Dinner at Torches Restaurant. This year, the future firefighter who received the scholarship gave the money to the widow and family of the Rancho Adobe firefighter who had a fatal heart attack recently. There was not a dry eye in the place, and she accepted our check, and we are most grateful for the young man who could have used that money to proceed his firefighting career, but he gave it, and that's community. I have buttons from that evening with the face of the firefighter who lost his life during that fire. I think it was the Tubbs fire, and I will give those to the fire department to remind us to thank a firefighter because they put their lives in danger. I believe our last movie is in the park. I see park staff shaking their head. Yes, it's on Friday, and it's at sunset in Lucchese Park, and it will be Coco, which goes along perfect with the president of the proclamation that we gave tonight for the Day of the Dead. And I too was at the Hall of the Above. My husband had an office in that building in the 90s. So it was a fun reminder of what we can do with some of these old buildings in Petaluma. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And Councilmember Pozike.
Thank you. I had a transit committee meeting at which we discussed the first couple of weeks of the Luma Go microtransit system. It's been very well received, and people are making lots of comments about how to improve it, as well as their satisfaction with it. And I think it is increasingly certain that it will be expanded in the next year, sometime in 2025, to include the east side and probably a second vehicle. That's about all I have in that regard. I do feel it's necessary again to comment that I do support a ceasefire and negotiations in the Middle East, and I think we're all going to have to make a decision sometime with the expansion of the war. Thank you.
Thank you. I too attended several of the same events. I think you see your council pretty engaged in the community and overlapping a bit, but we were at the mayors and council meeting this past week, and the main topics were the Sonoma County Transportation Agency and Regional Climate Protection Agency. We got quite the update of what the next year or two holds for them. And at the mayor's breakout part of that meeting, the county was sharing with us their plans for expansion of the Meacham Road dump, which will fill in about 15 years. So they're making plans for how the county will operate after that point. And the key part is mitigation for what a dump creates. They were also talking about the opening of their composting facility at the airport, still a bit away, but it'll be an industrial level. I mean, that's where all the composting in the county will go. That's not done at your home. And then they were also talking about the opening of the household hazardous waste facilities. So a lot of good stuff coming out of Zero Waste Sonoma. Generation Housing, as was mentioned, had their fourth annual housing summit, and national level speakers and all of our local nonprofits as well. Keynote from Michael Tubbs, former mayor of Stockton, and really moving. It's programs like that that inform my voting on Petaluma's housing policies. The Dia de los Muertos, as was mentioned earlier, is coming this Saturday, and it'll be in front of the Historical Museum, the Carnegie Library Museum. But this weekend, they held a What's Your Story Petaluma, and it was a real good event at our facility there. West Side Stories was there for free, and music, dance, flash memory recording, real good event. And I don't believe anybody's mentioned our bike share program. Remember, go to Redwood Bike Share as an app to ride those things. First 30 minutes free, so that's kind of cool. And then I also attended a Blue Zones meeting on the built environment. Blue Zones is rocking with their efforts, and also attended Petaluma Blacks for Communities Health Fair. And I got to discuss housing with representatives of the Community Development Commission and others who were there at that meeting. And that's been my week. So I'd like to pass it over to the city manager for any comments.
Well, Mayor and Council, you just took all of my comments. So the bike share was the last one. So thank you very much for being so engaged.
Okay, thank you very much. And any comment from our city attorney tonight?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you'd like, I can just mention briefly, I did respond. I sent a response to Ms. Flores at about 1:30 today, but she may not have seen it before coming to tonight's meeting. In that response, I included a transcript of my remarks on October 7th and her characterization of those to reemphasize that in my remarks on the 7th, I was referring to 3 particular complaints that she filed concerning Petaluma public officials, all 3 of which had been dismissed. And in that response to Ms. Flores, I included a copy of the dismissals from the FPPC. So it's important to note that my remarks were no broader than that. And if there are more questions that she may have in the future, I'll be happy to address them. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. And that closes that effort. And now we'll move to the consent calendar. And I'd like to ask if anyone on the dais has a question about the consent calendar. Councilmember Healy?
Yeah, I don't need to remove anything, but I do have a question on item 2.
And this would probably be appropriate time for question, yes.
Okay. So I'm fine with the tentative agenda for the next meeting, but we also get attachment 2 is a significant agenda item schedule for future meetings. And on that one, on December 16th, there's an item, certification of FEIR and introduction, first reading of an ordinance for the downtown economic overlay, economic opportunity and housing overlay. And that doesn't seem consistent with the most recent agenda planner the council has just received, because that doesn't show that. But it does show on November 18th, an item says policy direction to staff on downtown housing and economic opportunity overlay. So I'd just like clarification on which, if those are accurate or if they can be coordinated somehow. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilman. So based on the direction that we had received from Council at our last meeting, we're scheduled to come back on November 18th for the workshop / direction on the ordinance itself. And so that's just a remnant of, an older timeline. And so we don't currently have something scheduled for December. So that'll come off.
Okay. So the certification of the FEIR is not currently scheduled for December 16th. Is that
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it. And with that, Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to move the entire consent calendar.
I think we'll do a public
Oh,
comment.
public comment. I'm sorry.
And Councilmember Shribs, you had a question?
Yes, on item number 3 in the consent calendar, we do have a large purchase, which looked very interesting, but I think just for transparency, I think it would be a good thing for our fire chief to give us just a quick summary of what decision was made and how we're proceeding with that.
We happen to have the opportunity of having the chief in the house at this moment, and so if you could give us a rundown on bidding and.
Absolutely, and I happen to have something prepared just for such occasion. Thank you for the heads up. In this year's budget, it included a majority of funding for a new fire engine to replace one of our current frontline engines. Additional funds from Measure H will be added at our mid-year budget adjustment to fully fund this purchase up to $1.3 million. Fire engine build-out times are now currently 4 years to complete. We're ordering this engine now so that when this unit arrives, it can replace and move into reserve status a fire engine that at the time will be 12 years old with around 120,000 road miles. Last year, we took delivery of the same style fire engine, one with idle reduction technology using lithium batteries. It's been in service for almost a year at our D Street station, and with that new technology, hybrid technology, we're saving out 500 gallons of diesel fuel per year. And with the second engine, it'll be up to 1,000 gallons per year. All electric options for fire engines are now becoming more available, and as we build our new fire station and do safety upgrades of existing fire stations, we will ensure that infrastructure is in place to support all electric apparatus as a future option. I'd be happy to answer any specific questions if there are any.
Yeah, there was just one question that came up. I wasn't quite clear. There was a statement of something about prepayment. We get reduced pricing if it's prepaid. So are we going to prepay or pay at a later date when it arrives?
We are prepaying, which saves, I believe it's right around $115,000 in savings by doing the prepay, which we do plan on doing.
Okay, so we'll be putting that money out now then to set up the contract. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. And with no other questions, I think we'll go to public comment on this, the consent calendar. Please take it away.
Sure. We have not received any public comments on the consent calendar. Members of the public attending in person should bring their speaker cards to the clerk's desk if they have not already done so. Speakers are reminded to be respectful in their comments and that this meeting is being translated. Please pause between sentences for translation. I don't believe we have any comments.
And in that case, we'll close public comment. And Councilmember Healy?
And now I'll move approval of the consent calendar items 1 through 7.
And I need a second from Cater Thompson. Thank you very much. And roll call vote.
Barnacle?
Aye.
Cater Thompson?
Yes.
Healy?
Yes.
Now?
Yes.
Posake?
Yes.
Shribs?
Yes.
McDonald?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much. And we move on to public hearing and matters for consideration. Introduction of an ordinance to amend zoning map of the implementing zoning ordinance to pre-zone 12.9 acre site located at 5400 Old Redwood Highway to a business park, open space and park, and floodplain combination district. Zoning districts prior to annexation proceedings to be conducted by Sonoma Local Area Formation Commission, and to approve a resolution of application for reorganization of properties located at 5400 Old Redwood Highway. And help us out with this, we have Mike Janicek.
Thank you, Mayor McDonald, and good evening, good afternoon, members of the City Council. I'm Mike Janicek, here to present the staff report for 5400 Old Redwood Highway. This is the application types are for a zoning map amendment and an annexation, and this item is a continuation of the June 17th public hearing. So an overview of my presentation this evening. I'll provide a recap on the project background and scope of work. I'll summarize the meeting history and the responses to council comments. I'll review public comment. I'll go through the standards of review, and I'll provide staff's recommendation. If you recall, the project consists of 2 parcels. There is the rectangular primary parcel and then the triangular parcel on the right-hand side. They total 12.9 acres. This is along Old Redwood Highway at the northeast end of town. Nearest cross street is Redwood Way. The property is within the urban growth boundary, and as such, it has general plan land use designation. It's designated as business park, and so that demonstrates that a future annexation has been anticipated by the city. And there's also portions of the site on the western and northern perimeter that are designated open space, and that corresponds with Willowbrook Creek as well as an urban separator. The zoning, as you can see, there's no zoning on the property as far as city zoning is concerned because it's not within the city's jurisdiction. It does have limited commercial Sonoma County zoning at the present time. The adjacent city zones include planned community districts that implement the Redwood Business Parks, and there's also an open space and parks zoning district that runs adjacent to Willowbrook Creek. The two items or the two actions before council this evening to introduce an ordinance for zoning map amendment to pre-zone the 12.9 acre site to business park, open space and park, and floodplain combining district zoning districts prior to annexation of the city. The other action is to approve a resolution of application for annexation proceedings with Sonoma LAFCO. The authority to change the zoning map is found in zoning code section 25010, and this grants the authority of the council to amend the zoning map upon recommendation of the Planning Commission. And then in your packet, there's a memo in attachment 9 from staff that explains the annexation process. And to summarize that explanation, prior to an annexation, the proponent filing for the annexation must pre-zone the site before applying to LAFCO. And while it's not a codified requirement to adopt a resolution of application, it is Sonoma County LAFCO policy to receive a resolution of support from the receiving jurisdiction for an applicant-initiated annexation. Here is an exhibit that's a part of the exhibit to the draft ordinance, and that includes the proposed zoning. The base zoning would be business park. There would be floodplain combining district overlay that corresponds with portions of the site that are within the 100-year floodplain that's shown in the blue hatching. And then the green shading are the perimeter sections that would implement the open space designation. The purpose of the annexation is to connect to city utilities and services. The applicant would pay for a sanitary sewer extension to the nearest connection point. These connections would allow existing businesses to continue to operate, as well as there's vacant tenant spaces that the developer would be able to lease upon connection to city services. The item went to Planning Commission on January 23rd. At that meeting, the commission voted unanimously to approve a resolution recommending to City Council that they adopt the zoning map amendment. They also unanimously approved a resolution recommending City Council adopt the resolution of application for annexation. And they also, when they forwarded those two recommendations, they directed staff to work with the applicant to address concerns in a 2015 Councilmember Healy letter that expressed concerns about approximately 11,500 cubic yards of imported fill that are presently on the site. And the applicant, following the direction by commission, the applicant worked with West Consultants, who's the city's preferred floodplain engineer consultant and is working on the city's floodplain model. And they produced the fill analysis memo dated May 29th, which evaluated the fill removal. And the applicant also provided evidence of a Sonoma County grading permit for that fill placement from the year 2000. And staff, the city attorney's office prepared a pre-annexation agreement, which is in your packet as attachment 12, and that would ensure that any future development would be subject to the city's zero net fill policy as an adjacent property to Willowbrook Creek. So those were all of the incorporation of Planning Commission comments and feedback before the initial City Council hearing, which took place on June 17th at the regularly scheduled meeting. At that meeting, Council voted 5-1 to continue the item and directed the applicant to revise the fill analysis with more information specific to the extent of the city model, a more thorough discussion of the results, and more information from the applicant regarding future intended uses of the site. So the item is returning this evening with a revised fill memo that's in your packet as attachment 15. It's dated August 30th, in which another fill removal scenario was tested where 90% of the fill was removed to leave a berm-like condition that would try and mimic some of the same effects on the flow direction and rates of runoff. And in both scenarios, the conclusions were the same as the initial memo, whereby there is one property that has a approximately 0.5 half-foot reduction in flood depths, but there are other properties that would experience flood increases. And so the West Consultants concludes that fill removal is not recommended in either 100% or 90% removal scenario. The applicant's also here this evening, and they've prepared some slides that detail their future intended uses of the site. Some history on the public comments. For the June 17th meeting and hearing, two comments were received that were written comments, and they expressed concerns related to the imported fill, and the other was a letter of support from an existing tenant. At the public hearing on June 17th, there was testimony. Two public comments in person expressed concerns related to the imported fill. Two expressed concerns for flooding on site and on adjacent properties. Two comments expressed concern about the result of the fill analysis prepared by West. And one public commenter expressed support for the annexation on behalf of the existing tenants. And then this evening, after publication, 255 public comments were received, and all of them were expressing support for the annexation on behalf of the local business community, and specifically the local merchants and artisans that tenant the space. Staff is able to make the required applicable standards of review. I won't go into great detail. They're written in full in the ordinance and the resolution of application. attachments 1 and attachment 2, but in summary, the business park and open space zones implement the business park and open space general plan land use designations. The site is within the UGB, and a zone change would not change the development potential of the site. Future development would be subject to compliance with the zoning code and consistency with the river access and enhancement plan, and would be required to comply with the city's zero net fill policy. The amendment and connection to municipal services would allow the property owner to lease additional space and support the convenience and general welfare of the Petaluma merchants. It also expand the city's tax base and would allow the city to apply floodplain development policies and regulations within their own jurisdiction. And in summary, as far as the resolution of application, again, there's no required findings for that action. However, the same general plan findings are included and reiterated in that resolution. For CEQA, the project would be eligible for a Class 19 exemption, categorical exemption, which is for annexations of existing facilities and lots for exempt facilities. No exceptions to the exemption under 15300.2 would apply. And that's further reinforced by the general plan. EIR would have analyzed impacts for future growth within the UGB. And with that, staff is recommending council consider the ordinance in attachment 1 to approve the zoning map amendment for the 5400 Old Redwood Highway pre-zone, and then also consider a resolution recommending city council approve the resolution of application for annexation proceedings with LAVCO. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And the applicant is also on hand and has a presentation prepared regarding the future intended uses.
Were you intending the applicant to make the presentation now?
Yes, they're prepared to do so now. I think that's...
Are you recommending we invite him up?
Yeah, I think we should just flow right into that.
Does the applicant want to make a presentation?
Yeah, we started early today.
Thank you.
5, so you missed it.
Do you have that mic, or should we provide a drive?
We started at 5 p.m. today.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that.
Go ahead. You're fine. Okay. All right, well, while we're waiting, good evening. Thank you for having us tonight. All right, there we go. So I am Pauline Block. I run the development and marketing team for Cornerstone. We are a local property owner and developer here in the Bay Area, and the barn 5400 is a project of ours. Next slide, please. So we, between the Redwood Business Park in Petaluma and the Airport Business Park in Santa Rosa, we own about 30 properties, mostly all office, industrial, warehouse, R&D, a few retail sites, and then we have a handful of land and development projects, and those are really my focus, and a few kind of special projects. So the barn is one of those. Next slide, please. So we just wanted to show you kind of what's going on there now. Since everyone might not be familiar, we hope you've had a chance to come to one of our events and visit our artisans, but if not, Feed Sonoma is one of our largest tenants. They congregate, they're actually a co-op now, and they congregate local farmer produce and they sell it. They have a weekly produce box for consumers, and they also work directly with restaurants in our area. Next slide, please. Harmony Farms, they have their second location. They are a garden supply and plant store, and they have their first location in Sebastopol, which has been very successful for them, and so they opened a second location at the barn maybe 3 years ago. Next slide, please. Retrograde Coffee Roasters, they roast their coffee on site. They are a wonderful tenant, and they are looking to open a cafe on site, a walk-up cafe, which is in an existing space, and this connection would really benefit them as they can't get their environmental health sign off until they are connected to city utilities. So they would be one of the tenants that's very eager for this. And they have a really good community in Sebastopol, and we're hoping they would also bring that here. We know they have a lot of interest from clients that are excited for Petaluma. Next slide, please. And then in the other side of the barn, there are multiple tenants within a large space. And so we have a selection of fine artists, and then we also have some more retail-focused artists. Next slide, please. I think I'll show some of them. And so those are where we have our smaller studios. So they're affordable by design, essentially. They can support an artist looking to really move from maybe their home into a facility. And then we've had artists from here also move on to then open a larger store elsewhere. So it's somewhat of an incubator, but some of them also stick around. So Kick Wheel is one of our oldest tenants there. They're a ceramic studio. And then we have a bunch of other small studios. Next slide, please. We also host, a lot of the artisans actually host their own smaller kind of workshops and events, which is great for the community, but we also have free pop-up events, usually once a month during the summer. We also have some coming up for this winter that are smaller scale in our indoor space, and those are always very highly attended, and people have a lot of fun. There's some pictures of some past events up there. Next slide, please. So our vision is really to get Retrograde to be able to open on site in the existing kind of shed you see. We'd love to expand the outdoor markets. We have 2 open air sheds that we really haven't been able to activate, and so we feel that that would be a really nice outdoor space. We'd love to add some sculpture gardens. We draw inspiration from all over, but kind of what you see sometimes going north on 101, you can see a lot of beautiful sculptures from the highway. We'd love to add that beauty to Old Redwood. We have the North Bay Children's Center is actually another client on site. They have just their office space, but they do teaching gardens on school sites, and they've shown an interest in maybe doing a teaching garden on site to show teachers how to educate students and also have families come out to learn how to grow their own food at home. And then kind of food truck pop-ups, those are usually at our markets. So that's the vision of what we really want to expand into. Next slide, please. So there are a few improvements following annexation that we would need to do, which includes abandoning the existing septic system, obviously connecting to city utilities, some minor TI improvements, and then if there's any accessibility or parking upgrades, and then landscaping. Next slide, please. I think that might be the end. Yeah. So that's an overview. I'm happy to answer questions. I also just want to conclude by highlighting an article that came out this weekend, actually, in the Argus Courier. Not sure if you had a chance to see it. It was about one of our clients, Gio Benedetti. He has the Business for the Love of Comics. He hosts after-school workshops for students and does seasonal camps. And it's really great if you have a few minutes to go read it. It tells his story about kind of how he got to where he is, but he's always been in public spaces and on school campuses, and he finally found a space at the barn actually this past summer and moved in. And I wanted to read something that he said in that article because it just encapsulates perfectly kind of our vision. He says, "You can't support a thing if you don't have a place to do it. And I finally have my own space to teach, to work, to have open office hours, to make art. It's hard to overestimate the importance of having a space to do what you need to do. So it's been really great having a home." And that is really why we put so much energy into the barn. We have our bread and butter properties, but this is really a project for the heart. We believe in artists in our communities, and we feel it's really important to support them and keep them here. It creates vibrancy not only for the community of Petaluma, but for Sonoma County and the greater North Bay. So really appreciate your time tonight and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you, staff, for the great presentation. I'm sure there are going to be a number of questions when we bring it back up here. Before we do that, I just want to make a little comment to the audience I see arriving, helping you. We started our meeting early tonight at 5 o'clock because of the content we had to cover later in the evening. And so we have passed the public comment period, and so that is over for the evening. And now we're on item 8 of our agenda, headed down this direction. So there you go. Sorry you didn't hear about it sooner. I do apologize for that and getting you out on a night when maybe it would have been easier to be at home. Apologize. And now bring it back to council.
Does that get up for public comment?
As I indicated, public comment period was at 5 o'clock when we opened. That period has passed. There will be no general public comment from this point forward. Bring it back to council for any questions. Does anyone have a question? And Councilmember Healy.
Thank you. So I had submitted some questions from Rick Savell, who's I believe going to speak in a second, and from County Water Agency staff, and we did get a response back this afternoon to the first half of the question, but not to the second half. And I was wondering, I'll read the second question because the council hasn't seen it, and this is from County Water Agency staff who deals with Zone 2A and flood issues. It says, it seems that having an open parcel could allow for detention and reduction of downstream flood elevations if you could spend some time ironing out the details of how water gets into and out of the basin and come up with a design that doesn't show the flood increases as West's memorandum indicates. So I was wondering if there's a response to that part of the question.
Yes, Councilmember Healy. The revised film memo, and I'll summarize, but I'll paraphrase our response, but we also have Gina Benedetti Petnick in attendance representing Public Works for the city. But the revised fill analysis did respond to that second half of the question through its scenario B, scenario 2. Which shows the 90% removal, and so that was that alternative scenario.
I took that as kind of a step in the direction, but not taking it as far as County Water Agency staff had suggested. We try to take it to see if there's something more creative that can be done here. Mm-hmm. I guess, pardon my simplistic way of looking at this. I look at Petaluma as being at the bottom of the bathtub, and if you have 2 inches of water in the bottom of the bathtub and you put a brick in it, the top of the brick will be nice and dry, but the water level is going to go up everywhere else. So that's kind of my simplest, and I know there's exceptions to that, and this appears to be one of those, but I think it also has the potential of being something that's individually less than significant, but cumulatively with other things that could be extremely significant. This is 7 acre-feet of fill in the floodplain. We've spent a lot of money trying to create 10 acre-feet of floodplain reduction in our some of our projects. So it's a significant amount, and I'm just wondering if this is the absolute best that can be done with it, or if this was just kind of a pro forma response. So you can respond to that if you want to. That's just my observation.
Yeah, no, I think that's a valid question, and I think the flood. Wes did look at a lot of different scenarios and a lot of different possibilities. I think this was this second scenario with the 90% removal, where they leave that leading edge to sort of simulate some of that direction of the runoff. That was what they landed on as the best alternative, where there's either it's left in place or it's 100% removed. I can let Gina kind of
let me just make one observation
there, but
before Gina tells me why I'm missing something here. I think scenario 2 does look better than scenario 1. The maximum increase anywhere off site goes from it was in scenario 1 I think it was up to 0.06 inches, which is not a lot, but it goes. The maximum increase under scenario 2 is 0.03 inches, and you still have a half a foot improvement on a property adjacent to the site. So it looks like a net win to have the scenario 2 actually done as opposed to scenario 1. So it looks like that's a positive thing. But tell me what I'm missing here.
Yeah, I think that's how the exhibit shows it. And also to that exhibit that you're referencing, there's also less on the opposite side of the creek, which was directly responding to that water agency comment. But I'll let Gina fill in some more of the details on the different scenarios that were possible.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Councilmember Healy. Excuse me. They're great comments, and it is not an easy call to make, looking at scenarios 1 and 2, and saying, oh well, there's a little less negative impact in scenario 2 than in 1. But our consultant and I agreed that unless you could demonstrate an overall improvement to the area, it didn't feel that it was warranting any change. I will say that there are other projects in the area that we're looking at now, and trying to find some solutions that will offer more benefit to more properties. And we think we can do that. This felt like very minuscule improvement to some properties, and as much negative impact to others that it just didn't seem to warrant it. And we think we can do better. I believe in the staff report, at the very end, I mentioned that we're looking into a feasibility study, working with the pond at the business park, and partnering that with some other features closer to the river that we think will be more impactful and will slow flows and diminish flows and flood elevations to a greater degree. So this is all, all on a very fine edge. There's no real clear, that's the perfect answer here. We don't have it yet, but we're working on it. And with our new models, we are finding the complexities that we're creating are very challenging with the level of detail we have now, where we can look at flows and velocities and actually see the path of the water and how it's diverted. And this was an amazing case in point where it was very counterintuitive that you could increase water depths in some areas and decrease in others, and they weren't the areas we expected, and it's because of the way the water flowed around this area of fill. So it is challenging, but I think we'll be able to do some more work with this, and I think we'll be able to do more on other parcels.
Is there an alternative? It looks like the parcel line runs through the fill area, but not all of it is on the separate parcel. Is that accurate? I mean, I'm just wondering if there's some compromise here that keeps open the possibility of removing that fill in the future if this property is annexed, and it can be paired up with other things that make sense, like the Redwood Business Park ponds.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure this hasn't been modeled in conjunction with that at this point.
No.
You're not that far along.
We're just getting ready to, yeah.
Yeah, great.
And I'd also mention, I don't know where those property lines fall exactly, because I don't have that in front of me and I don't have it memorized. So, Mike, if you have that graphic, that would be great. But before we go there, I just wanted to also comment that now that we have the flood mapping, we're starting the FEMA process. It'll be a while before we get full FEMA approval, but they have started review already now on our mapping. And in the meantime, with our general plan update, we now have the direction, understand that we need to develop a flood adaptation plan, an assessment, and a plan. We are getting started on that initiative, and that particular plan very purposefully is intended to identify projects and help us prioritize projects in and around our floodplains for minimizing risk and minimizing flood impacts. And so I'm very excited to see that study starting to get off the ground. We're routing an agreement soon for executing that consultant agreement. So we're making great strides. We haven't quite been there fast enough to say exactly where this falls in the greater scheme of things, but I think not very high.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from council? Councilmember Posake?
Yeah, I'm not sure with the getting away from removing the fill and going to some of the ideas that were expressed by the first speaker and by Gina. I'm not sure who's going to pay for this different approach. Do we know that?
I think that's a fairly straightforward question. If fill removal is required by the city by a condition, who is responsible? Is that the question?
No, not. I thought that Gina was talking about doing something in a different point that could help. A retention pond increase of somewhere else in the business park, and I was wondering if that were who would pay for that.
And let's have a little bit of dialogue. I think we've got that. Councilmember Healy?
I was just going to offer to respond to Councilmember Posake's question, if you want.
Please.
Yeah. So the owner of the detention ponds facing 101 on next to Redwood Business Park is willing to cooperate with the city if we want to turn those from passive detention ponds that, because of the adobe soil, basically fill up in the first rainstorm of the season and don't do any good after that, into more actively managed and deeper ponds that would have higher capacity and could be emptied out to have spare capacity for the next storm. So that's what Ms. Benedetti Petnick was referring to in terms of being, but that's, half a mile away from the site.
Okay. Councilmember Shribs?
Just one question I asked before, I didn't quite sure of a clear answer, is if we leave it as is and continue the annexation with the soil in place, then does that become the zero mark, the net zero mark for future net fill, or does it always go back to the original, what it was before that fill?
I'll defer to Public Works on this one.
That's a great question. So my professional judgment on that would be that since this was a legally permitted fill, that it would be now considered the baseline. And that from this point forward, zero net would be from what is existing right now.
So that means it could not be removed in the future if we so wished, because it's now at net zero, so you can't remove it because of that.
It would have to stay. It would have to stay somewhere on site.
Okay, just want to clear what the consequences are down the road here for our net zero policy for this as we move forward. Okay, thank you.
Okay. I can see a little unsettlement in this, but I would like to move it to public comment on this item and ask if we've received any cards, letters, emails on this topic, and then to proceed to the messaging.
We did. We received over 250. I think last count it was 257. And I will read the messaging now. Members of the public attending in person should bring their speaker cards to the clerk's desk if they have not already done so. Speakers are reminded to be respectful in their comments and that this meeting is being translated. Please pause between sentences for translation, and the timer behind the dais will be reset for each speaker. I don't have any cards yet for this item. Here one more.
Is it time? Okay. For the card or to speak? Okay. Thank you. Rick Savell, former chair of Zone 2A and recently retired from Marin LAFCO. I don't have a transmittal from the water agency, but what I can tell you is as of 12/13, I did not talk directly to Aaron Fulton, but the other principal engineer, and he said that the summary memo did not satisfy their questions. I can't tell you why. I don't have a transmittal. I am a little concerned. I hear the applicant worked with West and, but nobody worked in collaboration with the water agency. That's just bad form. All these, Redwood business, anything we do has to be in collaboration, so they should always be in the loop to comment, just for form. I know I did say the last time, and I'm not hearing it again here, there's a lot of talk about how much detention and value there is to the west, whether it's a Redwood Business Park or it says here near the pumpkin patch. That's all to the west. But I'd put a great deal of emphasis that we can't lose sight of the fact that the overbanking there ends up on Redwood Drive and goes all the way down McDowell to Corona and flood. And that seems to be off the radar screen. Nobody's remembering to consider that factor in this. We're here to assist the city. We're not trying to intervene or, you all got to do what you got to do. But if you're concerned about the, detention, retention projects, then I'd recommend that the item be tabled, at least get some sort of confirmation from the water agency engineers before you take action on it. And I don't have anything more I could give you, so I don't want to take any more of your time. I'd be glad to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Follow up one?
And actually, Mr. Savell, I think we might have a question for you.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, and could you just clarify and maybe drill down a little bit on what your understanding is that water agency staff was looking for?
I can only say that judging by what Aaron Fulton first wrote, that they don't feel it's satisfied. And this could be a misinterpretation between the parties or a misunderstanding. I don't know. I can't speak for them. And I couldn't get to Aaron Fulton, but Carlos did confirm that between the two of them, the newer update did not address their concerns. I can't speak for them, and I'm sorry I don't have something more detailed I could give you, but I did confirm that. So I hope that answers your questions, Mayor McDonald.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that closes public comment on the issue for the night. I would like to invite our Public Works Director to comment on this, since whether the city is satisfied they've adequately investigated and collaborated with water agency, and any comment you have regarding the Corona overbanks as well. Do our studies cover all these issues?
Thanks. So for the Corona overbanks, if my colleague Pam Tuft is one of our Zoom panelists, she probably can speak to that more accurately than I can. With regard to coordination with Sonoma Water, we coordinate with Sonoma Water a lot, and Carlos never called and said, gee, I have concerns about this. I can't say that we routed this for comment to Sonoma Water, so that is a fair criticism. Again, we work with him quite a bit, and I'm happy to chat with him and see where his concerns lie. I read the same note that Mr. Savell referenced, and I didn't hear an alarming red flag there. I heard that, they would love to have probably talked to our consultant and played with it and talked through it a little bit with them, but I don't know that the dispute is over the conclusions of the report.
Okay, thank you. Let me ask one other question more broadly, is the fill on the undeveloped area? There's no structure on the fill, right? It's in the triangular space. Is that the part
Correct.
of property it's on? Thank you. That'll help inform my comments.
Mayor, I'd like to add that when we received the proposal for pre-zoning for annexation and the request for annexation, there's no development proposed as part of that discretionary activity. And so therefore, had we had development, we would have referred to Sonoma County Water Agency, but lacking any development proposal, just looking at that acceptance of the land into the city, we didn't refer for that reason.
Thank you. Councilmember Healy?
Yeah, it seems to me that this is our one bite at the apple on this, and if we act in haste, we may regret it down the road. I would like to see the council continue this one more time and give direction to West to actually reach out to County Water Agency staff and make sure their issues are being addressed. And it doesn't need to be a lengthy delay, but for that to happen.
All right. I think we're now in the council comment period unless staff has something to contribute at this point.
Did you want a response regarding the Corona Overbank and the water flow
please.
direction?
Yes. Thank you.
Pam, can you unmute? Are you on the call? I believe she
Yes,
is.
I am.
Oh, okay.
The reference Mr. Savelle was talking about was the fact that water flows out of Willowbrook and goes behind Redwood Business Park 1 and 2 along the railroad and travels all the way down to Corona and hits the open gully or open swale that runs towards the river along Corona at the south edge of the postal facility. When it hits McDowell, if its capacity is reached, it sheet flows across McDowell, and many people will remember the floods of the mid-'80s and again in 2005, 2006 over the holiday season. It sheet flows down McDowell and then impacts the two mobile home parks, Youngstown and Petaluma Estates. It further travels along Corona and ends up the big box culvert that crosses under 101 and dumps into the river just upstream out of a 72 and a 78, just upstream of the Corona Road Bridge. It also sheet flows across Corona at that point and enters the big swale that carries surface drainage from the mobile home parks and the freeway that runs southward and goes all the way down to where the DMV is, where it joins Capri Creek and goes under the freeway and flows into the river just south of the factory outlets. What we've done in the past is look at this drainage course all the way from Willowbrook to see if we could capture and hold it. And at one point in time, we looked at a possibility of taking some of that water from this site directly, which is at the edge of the urban limit line or the urban growth boundary, and getting it under the railroad tracks. And we talked to several property owners along Eli Boulevard whether they would be interested in spring ponds, similar to what you see along Adobe Road, where people have captured the winter rains and then hold it and use it for irrigation or just pasture watering. And so we had one owner who was very, very interested in it, and that was not pursued any further other than at staff level brainstorming, and we didn't get it to the point where we actually modeled it, but we did look at just the general feasibility of doing that. Those ponds would be, if you're looking at the map graphic that's attached to the West report, it would be the white area that receives flooding or has flooding from just surface flow that flows down off of the agricultural and open rural areas east of the Railroad. That's where we had talked about doing ponds. I believe that's designated community separator, or has an overlay of community separator in the county general plan. But we've looked several times at trying to get that reduced flow, or get the overflow of Willowbrook reduced in depth, because we do have water in some of the industrial buildings on Redwood Way, and further downstream. Does that help?
Yeah, thanks. That's perfect. Appreciate the input.
Mayor McDonald? So the property that she's talking about, it's on the south end of where 5400
Can staff
is.
pop that report, the staff report, up in the graphic necessary?
Is that the
We were just
site?
out there.
Huh?
We were out there.
That's why I'm asking. Yeah, which is an opportunity.
Yeah, it still remains an opportunity, as Gina was mentioning. We are starting to use the HEC-RAS models to do more extensive studies, similar to what we did very, very simply with Denman Reach phases 1, 2, and 3 down at Industrial Avenue in Corona, where we just kind of shaved on the XP Swim model. We just shaved some dirt off and then ran a model to see how much reduction of the base flood elevation into the buildings on Industrial we could get without any increase of flow in the head that goes under the Corona Road Bridge. HEC-RAS gives us much more flexibility and much more detail to do these brainstorms of watching how the water flows, as Gina was mentioning, and then saying, well, if we shaved it off here, could we hold it here for a while and reduce the peak flow so that we don't overwhelm the ditch on Corona? There's a number of sites throughout the town where we're starting to look at, well, is this a potential? Because those incremental reductions of downstream flows is what's going to allow us to hopefully address sea level rise and the increased intensity of precipitation that we're now looking at, that we've had in the last decade, and that is anticipated to do nothing but increase.
Thank you.
Just to follow up, so if this property, say if we annex this property in, but any development that would happen on the property would have to come back to the
That's a very good point. Yes.
And that would be addressed at that time, depending on the type of development. And so you could go through those modelings at that time and deny or approve. Just want to be clarifying.
Right,
That's,
right.
So tonight, we're just really talking about annexing the property for the existing tenants for potable water and sewer, but anything that would move forward would have to go through the whole process. And then, in the meantime, we can start looking at other modeling and means.
Right. Okay. Please weigh in, Mr. Healy. Yes.
Yeah, so buildings would have to come back for approval, I guess. If they're not, well, maybe they would need a rezoning there. I don't know, but depending on what they wanted to do. But this is our really one shot at possibly getting fill removed from that site. So, even if there's, because as we were just told that the existing conditions would be considered the baseline. And so if there's some permutation that comes down the road, if the council doesn't want to have West consult with County Water Agency staff before we take a vote, then we're going to lose the opportunity to require fill to be removed or shaved or moved around or anything else. So I guess another alternative would be to approve the annexation with the condition that if in the future the city needs to have or wants to have some or all of the fill removed, that they would be obligated to do that. Would that be a legally feasible condition here, Mr. City Attorney?
The struggle I'm having with this discussion tonight is the facts that we have in the record that seem to recommend the desirability of leaving the status quo. So I think the trick would be, our project conditions are always focused, factually on some kind of analysis that we've done or some kind of legal requirement that exists. And so I'm hard pressed to.
Can I maybe refine the question a little bit? So my thought process was that we not just, wake up tomorrow and decide we want the fill gone, but rather that, other projects that staff are working on in conjunction with doing something on this site may be beneficial. And we heard about the Redwood Business Park detention ponds and how that interacts with this, we don't know yet. And other opportunity sites that Ms. Tuft was talking about. But if it transpires in the future that it would be beneficial to have the fill removed because of other projects, terracing or flood pond projects that we're pursuing, and this would be beneficial to have that fill gone at that, can we have a condition here on the annexation that the property owner would need to cooperate with us on that?
I don't know. I'm struggling a little because that's a little. I think if I'm understanding that right, it's a little bit like saying, despite what the expert analysis shows now, if we're to conclude otherwise in the future, we have a sort of a right to impose conditions at that time, which is not a certain time. As has been pointed out, any future development on the site, if the annexation proceeds, will be subject to the full analysis of drainage impacts of the development and all the other review, project-specific review, development-specific review. So that's a safeguard. It may be that a majority of the council prefers, like you've suggested, Councilmember Healy, to await consultation with the water agency, and the council can give that direction. But I'm sorry, but I'm not coming up with a way to package a condition to potentially require fill removal in the future that doesn't seem supported by the record we have now, absent new facts. So, but.
Well, the new facts could be developed in the future. That's the point, that we haven't done the analysis that we're talking about.
Well, right, but I think usually what yields that is the development specific review that's done in the future, and then we have a nice solid factual basis for addressing those facts then. So I don't know if staff have other or better ideas, but I'm not coming up with anything absent, info from maybe the water agency that there's something else. I mean, we have our flood modeling has gotten more and more sophisticated. Our specific analysis was run again on this site, and you see the results. And the council members, I mean, those analyses are themselves complicated, and the council members may still have further questions, and that's, of course, their prerogative. But I'm not. It seems just like, I don't know, it seems like what's being proposed is to basically leave open a potential future condition to remove fill, even though our best analysis right now suggests that it's actually best left in place. We will, if project-specific drainage analysis, application-specific drainage analysis in the future would show a need for that, then we'd certainly be able to condition then. But I just feel like we don't have these facts unless I'm missing something that staff can help me with. Thank you.
Okay, for now? Good. I absolutely agree with Councilmember Healy. We have a flood problem in this town. I mean, probably that's not shocking. But what we're going to do about it is the big question. And I think the general plan dives in deep on what we do with flood problems, and it should. There could be opportunities here, like we said, but this is a legally permitted fill, and this is not a development application. And so holding our opportunities to when a development application comes in seems to me to be the right thing to do. The property's on the fill is on the undeveloped side of the property, and likely, if we wanted to do more flood detention, we would be spending city money to do more flood detention on any area. And it seems to me to be like a taking to ask for it now, when we specifically don't have data that supports making a taking now. So I would look for some flexible answer, some clever solution here. But on the whole of it, the annexation seems to be a positive to me. And it seems that the recommendations are that since nothing changes in the flood model, that we don't have an avenue that direction. I will look for more dialogue on this. And
well, just my comment is, if we're talking about other development on other properties, then they're going to have to do the same modeling and figure out how they're going to have to deal with or not approve other projects. So, I mean, it seems as though we're taking this project, which is just annexing so existing businesses can have sewer and water. And yet we're trying to tie in, there might be other development. And so how will this fill affect that development? Well, I think that other development is going to have to figure out what they're going to do and not depend on this particular property, because with the fill in or the fill out, there's just negligible differences. And I think there's a benefit actually keeping the fill in there for recreation and other uses. So I feel as though moving forward with the annexation is best for the many businesses that are on that site. And we'll deal with a different project when they bring a project forward or not.
Councilmember Barnacle?
Yeah. So for me, the modeling is pretty clear that it doesn't make a difference. And what would make a difference is strapping an enormous cost of having to remove all this fill. And I think the presentation that we heard made pretty clear that there is a lot of small businesses that are benefiting from affordable rent right now. And if we strap an enormous cost on this, those small businesses are not going to have affordable rent. And it's, going back to what the testimonial that was read from the paper, it's pretty clear that it's tough to find places like this. And if we're going to support artisans and support small businesses and things like that, we should probably annex this property in and recognize that we're not going to put all of Petaluma's, flood risks and things like that on this one project. We're going to, provide water and sewer so that Retrograde Coffee can expand their business, and so that other small businesses benefit from having city services.
Thank you. Are we ready for a motion?
I'll move approval.
Motion by Barnacle, second by Cater Thompson. And may we have a roll call vote?
Yes. Barnacle?
Aye.
Cater Thompson?
Yes.
Healy?
No.
Now?
No.
Posake?
Yes.
Shribs?
Yes.
McDonald?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much. Thank you, staff, for the clarity that we got tonight. Thank you, applicant, for being here tonight. And that'll move us on to our next item. And that next item is the presentation and discussion of the draft land use framework in order to provide a summary of the community engagement and feedback received, and to receive input to inform revisions to land use policies as part of the development of the draft general plan. This will specifically focus on draft land use policies in the framework and be allowed by additional discussion on land use alternatives and land use designations at a subsequent city council meeting. To help us with this is Heather Hines, our special projects manager. So I think we'll take a little minute while the room clears, and then move on to this item.
Mayor, just let me know when you want me to.
Let's wait one more chair. You want to go around? You okay if we start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
I can see your
Okay.
Let's go ahead.
Overlooking your shoulder.
Good evening, Mayor, Council members. I'm Heather Hines, Special Projects Manager, here to talk about the land use policy framework. And I am here with Brian O, Community Development Director, as well as Ron and Troy from REME. So I am going to kick us off and do a few of the background slides and then turn it over to Ron. Next slide, please. So this is just an overview, our typical overview of what we're going to be talking about this evening. And really of note here, and as introduced by the mayor, we're here tonight to talk about policies in the land use framework. Specifically on the policies and pushing the discussion on the alternatives around the areas of change and the land use designations to a subsequent meeting. We just finished our discussions with the General Plan Advisory Committee on Thursday, and they did spend quite a bit of time really focused on those areas of change, those alternatives around the areas of change and the land use designation. So that will be a subsequent discussion with the council, likely in December, when we have an opportunity to pull all of that information together and present that to the council. So for the purpose of our discussion tonight, we are focused on the policies within the land use policy framework. Next slide. So this is our roadmap, and we are now in step 5, moving closer and closer to development of the plan and review and adoption along with the environmental impact report. Next slide, please. So you've seen this before. This is the final policy framework. I believe it's number 14 of all the policy frameworks that were developed to inform the general plan update. So this is similar to the other 13 that we have brought before you, brought before the CCBs, brought before members of the public at different outreach efforts, as well as before the GPAC. And this really just lines out the format that we're looking at each of the frameworks, including goals, policies, and implementation actions. Next slide. Also just want to point out this was something that came up a number of times as the community was reviewing the frameworks, that these were kind of boring, kind of dry, siloed by topic. And yes, these are specific topical frameworks. These will inform the general plan, but these don't just cut and paste into the general plan. So the general plan, we will be looking at organizational changes. It's not necessary that everything in the Parks and Rec framework becomes a Park and Rec element in the general plan. So there will be some changes to the organization, much of that in response to comments received. It will be a more holistic approach in the general plan. It will be more user-friendly and important too. And we heard from a number of discussions with the community. It will also include an implementation plan and tracking so that we can track our implementation of the general plan once it is adopted and we are using it. Next slide, please. So this shows our discussion of land use to date, and really this starts with October 2023, but it really extends much further back than that. When we were doing much of the visioning, we were breaking things down into areas of change based on input we were getting with some of our quadrant meetings. So land use has been part of the discussion for a very long time. So while we're talking about the framework that was released in August, end of August, I believe, that conversation and the building up to that release of that framework has really been over a year or more to get where we are today. So we have been before General Plan Advisory Committee and Planning Commission. We have been before community in a variety of formats that Ron will touch on later. We're here to receive your input on the policies in this framework. We are then going to take all of the input that we have received, like I said, come back for a workshop with the City Council on the land use designations, the area of change alternatives, likely in December. And then we will come up with a preferred land use map and go back before the General Plan Advisory Committee, Planning Commission, and back before the City Council. And the reason that is such a milestone in this process is because we cannot start the environmental impact report until we have a land use map to be working off of. So that is what we're working towards, but really want to be clear with the council that there are a number of times that there are going to be discussion on this topic before we're walking away with a preferred land use map. And I believe with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ron.
Thank you, Heather, and good evening, council members. It's good to be with you again this evening. I'm going to very, very briefly provide an overview of the framework and then touch a bit on what we did to get public feedback on the land use policy framework. Assuming at this point that you've had a chance to look this over, we didn't think it would merit the time to go through an overview of the framework in detail, and so the next two slides are really just a very high-level overview of what is contained in what is over a 100-page document. The front end is designed to be an overview and then an introduction to what the framework is all about. And then a quite extensive section called Land Use Drivers that summarizes all of what Heather referenced earlier, all of the input and analysis that drove the production of the land use policy framework, including community input all the way back to the vision, pillars, and guiding principles, and all the analysis going back to existing conditions, plus all the additional analysis we've done since then, including the the flood modeling and mapping, parks mapping, etc. We also thought, because the land use element is very much the heart of the general plan, it was important to be very clear in the framework how it will be implemented. And so there are subsections on how landowners, developers, and staff use and refer to the general plan during the development review process, a summary of the range of code updates that are recommended in this draft of this plan framework, and then a note about how there'll be subsequent planning done and or updated to ensure consistency of those additional plans with the general plan. Then there's a section that provides an overview of the overall land use direction as detailed in the framework. And then there's what we might call the heart of the framework, which again, as Heather mentioned, is not what we're focusing on tonight, that we'll be coming back for deeper discussion with you later. We call it the land use foundation. That's where the designations are described, standards associated with the designations are included, and then there's a series of areas of change, we call them, and options for changing general plan land use designations in those areas. The remainder of the framework is arranged in 4 chapters, each focused on a major different kind of policy direction or policy area of the framework. The first is really about kind of the citywide approach to land use, including and really kind of foundationally starting with a firm urban growth boundary, the prioritization of maintaining and expanding open space within and adjacent to the city, the focus on infill development, the focus on transit-oriented development, and the critical role that the river plays in land use in the city, both in terms of preservation of key ecological and other open space resources, as well as the importance of river-adjacent development, both being protected from flooding and, where it's appropriate, being oriented to appropriately and providing appropriate access to the river. Chapter 2 then is really focused on a variety of strategies and approaches to helping Petaluma evolve as a 15-minute city. It begins with identifying some proposed what we call activity centers, and those are 3 types: town centers, neighborhood centers, and mini centers or activated parks. And then goes on to explain how complementary policies focused on residential density, diversification of uses within largely residential neighborhoods, and the need for supporting infrastructure to support these 15-minute neighborhoods and to complement those other strategies. And then Chapter 3 is really focused on what so many people during the process have identified as being so critical for Petaluma, which is maintaining, retaining, celebrating, and enhancing the unique design and character of the community. And so there are goal areas focused on sense of place, establishing gateways and enhancing corridors, being very proactive about design in future development, and then a final goal area focused on sustainable development, which complements much of what's in the blueprint for carbon. What's it called now? Blueprint for climate action. Thank you. In terms of very specific focus on future building development, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, et cetera. And then finally, Chapter 4 is a modified version of the existing policies focused on different sub-areas of the city, largely updated to remove redundancy with policies that are found elsewhere in the framework that are focused on a citywide scale but have relevance to specific sub-areas. And then finally, we close with a glossary. A lot of people had questions initially about terms, and so we thought it was important to be clear about what we meant by different terms, and so we took the existing glossary from the general plan, filtered it for all the things that were land use specific, and proposed some updates and additions. So, as Heather mentioned, we released the public draft policy framework in late August. and then had a quite extensive public engagement and review period. We got the word out about this opportunity through banners on the website and a page within the web, the website specific to the project, focused specifically on the land use framework, where people could download the document, provide comments on specific goals or policies, download the maps, access an ArcGIS online map that provided a lot of useful reference layers, etc. There were flyers and posters posted around town advertising the 2 in-person workshops, which I'll say a bit more in a minute. Banners in front of City Hall on Kentucky Street and at the community center, I believe. Lots of boosted social media. I'm not a social media expert myself, but I believe what that means is using the city's existing social media and boosting it so that it shows up higher on people's, it's not search, but their feeds. Thank you. Sorry, I should ask my son before I do these presentations. And then we also send information and encourage people to attend community events through the school mailers. There was a Know Before You Grow forum specifically focused on the land use framework, which is a great way both to answer some very specific questions and get the word out amongst a audience that we know is very interested in these issues. Obviously, had a lot of information in the city's weekly emails, and also there's a GP-specific email list that we advertised events through, and then there was also a advertisement in the Argus. So high level, we have the online feedback forum I mentioned already, but also 9 different pop-up events, and those are really designed to be like go where people are sorts of activities. They're held at places people frequent often and where there's lots of foot traffic. So for instance, there was an event at the fairgrounds, Harvest Beats, where we had a pop-up. Went to food trucks that had a lot of traffic in certain times of the week. Lots of parks where we knew there was going to be lots of activity, et cetera. Really tried to focus those on places where we were thinking about land use change and asked people at those pop-ups specifically about those change options. A lot of people, we talked with a lot of people through those events, about approximately 230 overall. We then held 2 workshops, which I'll say a bit more in a minute, but overall had about 110 participants at those. And then largely we also looked very much to the Planning Commission, whose primary purview is land use, as well as the General Plan Advisory Committee, whose role is to provide us detailed feedback on draft work product like these frameworks. I looked to them for a detailed review and got tremendously useful feedback, some of which is summarized in your staff report. So again, a bit more about the workshops or open houses. One was on a Saturday at the fairgrounds, another the following Wednesday at the community center. I think many of you were there, but for those who weren't, it was arranged in stations. One was focused on kind of citywide strategies, the remainder in 4 major clusters, river, downtown, corridors, and 15-minute centers. In each of those, there were set pairs of maps, both explaining current conditions, what's currently allowed, other factors that drove our thinking about land use in certain areas, invited input on the types of development people wanted to see, the level of change, and other improvements that they thought would complement future development. And then in those areas where we're considering different options for future land use change, invited people's comment on what they thought about that, from strongly opposed to strongly support, and why. Should also note that we made an effort during this land use engagement to reach out specifically to Spanish-speaking residents. There was a Spanish executive summary of the land use framework available on the project website. It was also printed copies of it were also available at the 2 workshops. At each open house, we also had several Spanish-speaking staff on hand to help and support primarily Spanish-speaking residents that came. Likewise, at 7 of the pop-ups, we had a Spanish speaker available. And at one in particular, it was a Spanish-only pop-up. It was held at Cafe Puente, where our prerequisite they gave us was that we only have materials in Spanish, and so the boards were translated into Spanish, the handout materials were in Spanish, the facilitators were fluent Spanish speakers, and so it was a great way to provide an opportunity for people to provide input in the tongue they're most comfortable with, and help them understand what the framework's all about and get their feedback on citywide strategies. Should know, we haven't shared much about this yet. It's still a bit under development as we develop collaborative relationships with community-based organizations, but we're reaching out to a range of CBOs in town who work with underrepresented or underserved members of the community and want to partner with them to do a combination of probably listening sessions and surveys to hear directly from folks. Again, taking very much the go to where people are approach. That's the key to the collaboration with a community-based organization. So we'll be doing that through the fall, focusing on a range of issues, many of which are covered in the various policy frameworks, including land use, but with a particular emphasis on environmental justice and the 6 topic areas that are required by SB 1000. So quickly, you have a few slides summarizing what is summarized in more detail in your staff report. Some of the feedback, really just examples of some of the feedback we received from the Planning Commission, the GPAC, and the public. I should really emphasize this is just a very small subset of examples of comments. We tried to pick those that were fairly representative of the diversity of input, but should also really stress that because we're sharing with them on these slides, sharing these with you on the slides or in the staff report does not mean we're taking them at face value. We're considering them along with all the other comments, some of which are in disagreement with one another, and we'll consider them along with all the other analysis that we considered when developing the frameworks to come up with recommended revisions to these moving forward. So I just want to emphasize, just because they're on the screen doesn't mean we're necessarily going to do exactly what people are suggesting. So planning commissioners gave us a lot of great useful feedback on the 15-minute activity center idea specifically. Also expressed support for the approach we take in land use goal 10 to the historically agricultural supporting industrial sites, and then had some other very useful comments on corridor improvement and kind of supporting the focus on high quality design and future development. Likewise, the GPAC also gave us lots of great input on different aspects of the 15-minute city, specifically on 15-minute activity centers, and also really good input and feedback on how to approach facilitating getting more high-density housing in the future and what types of housing that would be most useful. And then likewise, the public, again, the 15-minute city concept elicited a lot of interesting comments, many in disagreement with each other. But then also we received comments from folks who've worked historically on the Lafferty Park area, as well as the River Park Foundation, both emphasizing the need to continue their efforts, ensure consistency between the evolution of the general plan and their work. And then that's really it for our summary. Again, you have much more detailed summaries of public input in your staff report. We very much look forward to your feedback this evening. As Heather mentioned, we're really just focusing on the policy aspect of the framework, and we'll come back to you soon with to support a rich conversation about potential land use changes. So tonight, what we'd find really helpful is your feedback on all the other written policies in the framework. For instance, what do you think is most important? Do any raise any concerns or questions for you? Think they could be strengthened? Do you think the policy direction is incorrect, for instance? And really kind of getting back to the fundamental vision, pillars, and guiding principles that are driving everything since we established those early on in the process. Do you see anything in the framework that is not consistent with those, or do you think the framework needs to do a better job in any way in advancing some of those elements of the vision, pillars, or guiding principles. So we'll leave it at that for now. Happy to take any clarifying questions and public comment, then look forward to receiving your feedback.
Okay, thank you. Great presentation. And yes, that's the key item in the general plan. We're at the big deal here. So, and I did watch the presentation and dialogue from Planning Commission, and they really drilled down deep, and I really appreciate the work that's coming out of the Planning Commission on this effort. And with that, I'd like to invite Councilmember Barnacle to start.
Yeah, my question was asked, and it was really open-ended, so I didn't expect it, but I wanted you to be prepared for it. Was really, how did the input that you received vary based on location in the city, or going to Cafe Puente? What did you hear there that maybe was different from what you might have heard in some of the bigger workshops?
Yeah, that's a great question. So at the workshops, so at the pop-ups, it's difficult to get people to sign in and provide their demographic information, and so we really just kind of have a more observational understanding of the participation at those. And generally, we had kind of rates of participation of Latinx community members and youth that are comparable to or slightly higher than what the census tells us are the current demographics in the city. So that was a great thing. What we don't have, what we aren't able to do is correlate the feedback we got specifically at those pop-ups to that demographic specifically based on the way the data was gathered. For instance, we use the boards. We reuse the boards often at different pop-ups, and so you may very well find stickers or dots on a board that was used at one or more at pop-up that so we can't tie it back to like who specifically may have attended a particular pop-up. At the workshops, we did ask for demographic information from participants if they were willing to share it, but again, we can't connect people's specific demographic characteristics to the comments they left on the boards. So there's no way to do any kind of crosstab to check input by age or ethnicity or anything like that. So we can't drill down at that level if that's what you're really getting at.
Well, it is kind of what I'm getting at, because part of if we're trying to incorporate equity into our decision-making process and we're not able to discern what we heard from our underrepresented members of the community, then I don't have the ability to advocate for that from up here or incorporate that into my decision-making. It all just sort of gets lost in, and then, one would expect that those dots are the ones where there's, 2 of them instead of where there's 10, and that sort of is just continuing the sort of, they're underrepresented, so they don't, their voices don't matter, and that, sort of perpetuates that.
And that's exactly why we're doing this more robust effort in the coming months. It's not unusual for folks in some of these underrepresented communities not to come to. It's often you got to come to a place where they feel safe and comfortable. And that because SB 1000 topics cover such a range of things, access to public services, access to healthy food, healthy housing, a lot of topics that are otherwise addressed in the general plan. We're going to use it as an opportunity to not just talk about environmental justice, but a range of topics, and hopefully hear from a pretty representative cross-section of the community in that manner.
Yeah, I'll save my comments. Thank you.
It's a very good point. It's a little tricky to get comments separated from questions in a content-driven like this. I think we're not opposed to blending them here to first round. I do want to notify the public, make sure we recognize we'll do a public comment period. First, we're going to chew a little bit up here. Maybe it's not strictly question. This is that's forgivable tonight.
I'll chew. Then I'll chew a little bit farther. I think it's critical that in the next work that you do, that it is separated out. Because it's not just for us, it's also for us to be able to ground tough decisions for the public in values, right? Like that's I went to the workshops, and what I felt like was missing from all of the dialogue between the participants was a real like solid understanding of how our values are represented in land use decisions. And I think for people who are steeped in planning, it's like, it's things that we really consider and we know, but to bring the public into it, there needs to be like a real reflection of values in land use decisions. And it's really hard to do that if we don't have the input broken out by the communities that we're capturing it from. And I think also just as we do more, like I think, having a part of this of like, here's what you said about your values, and then here's what you said about land use, because what I observe right now is that our current land use policies are not in line with our values. Right? There's a reason why teachers can't afford to live here, and that's because the land use decisions we've made have pushed them out. That's why we've seen a 20% decline in families living here, because the policies that were adopted in prior general plans have pushed them out. And so I really think it's important for us to get people to actually say what their values are so that we can address that disconnect that is not so intuitive to the average person.
Councilmember Shribs.
You can try this one. Technical difficulties tonight. My screen went out earlier. Anyway, so one of the concerns, thank you. One of the concerns I have what came up in some of the workshops that we had, and folks were putting up all these red dots, and at almost in every location that was alternative was a 6-story building. Lots and lots of do not do on every single one of those. I suspect that may be a possible result or outcome of current controversy about the overlay in the downtown hotel, which is 6 stories. And so people were expressing that by putting on lots of red dots on anything that was 6 stories. So that's my suspicion, but there are some concerns I have in the language and in the possible way that the vagueness and how things, there's a couple things that may be in conflict. I want you to clear up a little bit on this whole storyline of high density housing and 6 stories versus 4 stories and things. So in there, in the several of the frameworks and what you have, you've got high density housing is needed, everything, especially affordable housing, like all housing is needed. You have 15-minute communities that are really needed, which are putting development, large amount of development into parts of town. There may be anywhere from duplexes, triplexes, maybe 6 stories as an alternative. And then we have downtown, which isn't quite fleshed out yet as far as how is it going and developing with the current overlay that's being discussed. So I'm thinking about how in this general plan, which is 20 plus years, 25 years, 20 years plus, versus RENA, which is an 8-year plan. In RENA, we have no housing pretty much proposed in the immediate downtown area, but that's only an 8-year cycle. And I'm thinking the next 8-year cycle and then the next 8-year cycle after that. So in the amount of housing we're going to need in the next 25, 30 years is what we need to be thinking about, not the next 8 years in the RENA cycle. So currently that says, okay, no housing downtown. Will we be able, so the questions I'm coming up with is, if we have to prioritize 15-minute community development and putting money into that and effort and staff time into that, is that going to be in conflict with, we need to do a downtown development scenario and really spend time on that? I see a possible shift between downtown development and 15-minute community. It's a little bit in conflict in my mind and how that gets put together. And can you do both at the same time? So that's one of the concerns I have is that, the general plan right now is heading to, we're going to do all these things at the same time maybe, or do we have to prioritize as we go along? Which one are we going to do? Money in 15-minute communities outside of downtown or monies into downtown. And then on housing, for the RHNA, not this cycle, but the next cycle, and the cycle after that is still included in the general plan. So 3 cycles of RHNA. Well, those cycles kind of, since infill with the urban growth boundary, is there enough spaces away from downtown that we could do all of our housing outside of the downtown area? Or will we need downtown development in the next 25 years to meet those future RHNA numbers that we're going to be required to meet? So that's where, like, what I'm playing with is how we actually suss out where to put the housing in town here and where to put that monies and staff time. And because I see that possibly as a little bit of a conflict. Anyway, so I just thought I'd get your field take of what you feel about what I'm saying and housing, RHNA numbers, and where to put staff time and effort into our development zones here. Because how we use our land use. Because that's sort of setting up a pattern. And right now is, everything is a go. But we can't go everywhere at the same time. So how are we going to set up priorities in deciding where we're going to put things? And what are your thoughts? What have you heard? And what are your thoughts now from all the people you've heard from?
Start. So one thing I do want to clarify is, and we're starting to talk a little bit about land use, which we weren't going to really talk about land use, but we were going to talk about policies, not like the designations, but in the areas of change and in the different alternatives that are laid out, there are choices. And so that's the work ahead of us, is making those choices on where do we want it to go? Where do we want to prioritize? It doesn't all have to happen at the highest intensity level that's presented in the alternatives that are presented, to get feedback, to get thought going, to be, thinking about where do we want to have higher intensity, higher density, all of that kind of stuff. So I want to be clear on that there's nothing in there that says you have to go highest intensity in every single one of these. And so when we do come back to talk to council, we have some information about population projections and some of those factors to help think about that. I do believe that some of the input we got, there's more openness in some areas than others. And again, this is the information that we will be distilling to bring back before council. But for instance, the areas closest to the smart stations having more of a appetite for more intensity, or I believe there were a few of the neighborhood centers where there seemed to be an openness to more development options than others. Others really wanting to stay smaller or a lower intensity. So those are a couple things that we will be thinking about to bring back when we come back to have that discussion about land use, is exactly that, prioritizing, coalescing a lot of the input we got from Planning Commission, from GPAC, from members of the public, and pointing out where there was similar feedback, where there were differences of feedback, and different ways we can be thinking about that.
Vice Mayor, I'll just add, I think it's also important to look at the opposite end of this. Where are we wanting to potentially de-intensify or keep, the same? And so we've spent as a council, as a community, as staff over the past several years wrestling with new models. And so, we just had a conversation about future flooding and sea level rise, which suggests that we may want to consider, for a number of reasons, de-intensification or a lack of intensification on the north end of town. And then, which is somewhat in conflict with the fact that we have a new train station coming online right around the corner, also on the north end of town. So it's important if, there's a, Councilmember Barnacle mentioned sort of values-based engagement with his remarks. if we as a community, I think what is crystal clear is we want to preserve our history. And part of that is our city limits, our growth boundary. So in order to keep the growth boundary intact, there are some real conversations and opportunities for council and community and staff to consider, yes, it'll likely boil down to height and stories as one way to figure out what that intensification is. And that's still ahead of us, right, as a community to figure out, where it goes. I think just an early preview, a lot of it is, as Heather pointed out, it's transit-oriented development around both stations. And so, we do still have opportunity sites that are in and around our downtown station, which also happens to be, in our downtown. So that's, I think, just an important consideration to have. I don't believe our current RENA, yes, we were fortunate enough to not have to rezone any sites to hit the bare minimum threshold of what state law requires. But what, again, is crystal clear is we want to go above and beyond that for a lot of good reasons, for housing stability, housing affordability, preservation, to ensure that we have, good workforce housing and opportunities for people like our teachers. And then also just a comment just about the no housing downtown. And that's really where we're seeing the activity, the redevelopment, the investment is housing in our downtown or just on the fringe of our downtown. So I don't know if I wouldn't characterize it as, we aren't wanting to promote housing downtown. Housing exists downtown for a lot of good reasons. We want, the infill around our amenities. Downtown is really a true 15-minute city already naturally. And so there's not a whole lot that, I think comes up in that discussion. But again, there's opportunities downtown for housing. Now, again, as you mentioned, we're sort of having those conversations about, how to create more opportunities downtown. And part of this discussion is you have the maps behind you. It'll start to crystallize, where we want to focus. And that's downtown. It's through this corridor approach. A lot of discussion around Washington, as well as north and south end of the boulevard, up and down McDowell. We're about to kick off a specific plan to realize some redevelopment along the corridor. And then, how do we incrementally increase some density in, all the yellow, right? All the single family neighborhoods that are all throughout town. And so it's a little bit of everything. We don't have to do everything all at once. That said, this is our opportunity to look at it holistically through this process.
Councilmember Cater Thompson.
I just want to follow up with the discussion we had earlier was about the flooding. And so, that's what what I'm focusing on a lot of areas, especially from the Lynch Creek Trail north. And I just think it's important that when we're looking, we just really need to understand the flooding in these areas and how we're going to protect downtown from future flooding, because the Corps of Engineers always said more upstream development, more downstream in the downtown, there would be flooding. And so I think that it's really important to look at that. And, when I look at like green spaces for people, that is an opportunity area maybe to look into so we can develop in other areas and we're not flooding people out. And then the other thing is, when we're talking about no housing, are we getting into a slippery slope like in downtown? I mean, that it's exclusionary. And how does that, where does that take us legally? If we're all of a sudden excluding in certain areas and pushing for other areas, is there any legal issues that the city could run into?
I think that we'll just have to be looking at that question in context. I think it's going to come down to, making sure the implementation of the goals match up with fulfillment of our obligations to provide housing. It's going to be some of that is going to be controlled by the new vehicle miles traveled rubric for how vehicle impacts are measured and analyzed. It's no longer levels of service like we're used to under the existing general plan. So we're just going to have to look at those things together. And there's there's tremendous, rightly so, tremendous value placed on the historic resources in the city. There's preserving those. So there's, it's a bunch of things to consider that I think will probably be best and most easily considered in context together. And, we'll look at it.
Okay.
Councilmember, I'll add one thing. I think we've mentioned this a few times, just this concept of no net loss. And so I think it's worth mentioning as we start to have this conversation of where to, focus growth or evolution of the city to match the vision and value of our council and our community. If we choose to pull back some sort of residential on, one part of town with respect to flooding, we have to balance that with the context of state law that requires us to make sure that you pull it away from this side, you kind of have to bring it up over here, so that you're still maintaining that balance. So that's a theme that we'll continue to touch on as we start to talk about the land use map.
I appreciate that. And then when I was at my SCTA meeting the other day, somebody was talking about school properties and housing. And I just think it's really important that we look at the benefits of school properties for actually housing for teachers, firefighters, and first-time home buyers, basically. Because it seems as though there was a 15-minute neighborhood center on one of those properties, and it seems like it would be a better use for housing. But specifically for school properties, what's the difference between what you can do on school properties versus other properties?
And I was just going to add also that, some of those neighborhood centers, they're not exclusive of housing. They are looking at introducing those uses that people want to see in their neighborhood, but maybe there's housing on top, or, so it's that ability to mix them. And to the no housing downtown, and kind of to Councilmember Barnacle's point about values and our land use, when we did the vision, the guiding principles, there's a lot of information in there, and that was created by the community, presented early on to make sure we all understood the vision that we were working towards. And there's a lot in there about, having housing centralized, close to transit, close to services, reducing VMTs, all of those kind of things. So it's that push-pull with how we create a preferred land use pattern for the community that is in keeping with those values that we identified as well.
I appreciate that.
Councilmember Healy?
Thank you. So I guess I'm going to characterize this as a policy question, so I'm going to pretend it's not a land use issue. But I think one of my issues was similar to what Councilmember Shribs was articulating about how this general plan has to accommodate basically 3 or 3 1/4 arena cycles. And, my crystal ball isn't any better than anyone else's as to whether the numbers are going to go up or plateau or go down a little bit. But I think we need to have an honest discussion about how we accommodate 3 1/4 arena cycles worth of housing in this 25-year general plan. And within that, I'm hoping I don't have an answer on this one, but I hope there can be a discussion of different housing types, in particular ownership versus rental, because I don't think the default position is we just want to build 100% apartments. I think we would like to do a mix for a variety of reasons. Yeah, so that's, and kind of related to that, I did go to the workshop at Lucchese, and it was very interesting to walk around the room and see all the interesting things that were up on the wall. One of the questions I asked at a couple of the stops was, has the city outreach to these major property owners? If you outreach to Simon Group, the owner of the Outlet Mall, if you outreach to Washington Square or Plaza North or Plaza South, some of whom don't have particularly friendly thoughts about the city for various reasons going back. But also some of those properties have been in the same ownership for multiple decades, and I don't think we can really expect them to be changing. So I think it would be a good idea to outreach to them and just pick their brains and see what they would be willing to be open to in the future. And on the Outlet Mall one, I was a little bit taken aback to see housing being proposed there. This is an aerial photograph of the Outlet Mall during a flooding event, and all the buildings were underwater, or there had water in them, and the parking lots were flooded. So, unless there's some idea as to how to resolve the flooding issue there. And just I know people think I've been on the council for a long time, but I was not on the council when that thing got approved. It was before my time. I'd be very skeptical of trying to put housing on that site unless there's some clever fix which would elude me as to how that could work. And then, let's see. I was glad to see that in the PowerPoint there was some skepticism raised about. I mean, I love the idea of the 15-minute community, but I think some of these activity centers are more wishful thinking than reality, and I was glad to see some skepticism around that. But I'm wondering how you ground truth them. I don't know who you talk to, if you talk to business owners or if you talk to leasing people or who you talk to, but I don't want us to be approving a document that has things in there that are just kind of wishful thinking and not things that have a possibility of actually happening. And then my final point is, as the city attorney mentioned, the state is requiring us to move from level of service to vehicle miles traveled for CEQA traffic analysis. But I believe there are some jurisdictions that continue to do both, just so you can see what the LOS is. I would like to see us do that because, VMT is what it is, but a 2-mile trip is going to be a 2-mile trip, and it doesn't really care if it takes 10 minutes or 40 minutes. And I think the community does care about things like that. So I'll stop there for now.
Thank you. Councilmember Now.
Thank you. I participated in 2022 at the fairgrounds, and it was, I can't believe, a Luma Fest or one of the Plan Fest. Anyways, on 15-minute cities. Did we, and I know there was a email sent by the group that put it on. Did we use that input from the community in our looking ahead to the future? Because it was really interesting to see different people looking at their neighborhood and identifying where they have to travel, and then the seniors are saying, well, yeah, it takes me 15 minutes to just get out of my car and get my walker. So we have to identify that growing population of the seniors, not just families, which we want to encourage, but also the seniors' needs and the aging in place, because that's a growing population. And we want to encourage teachers and emergency workers and city staff and hospital workers to live in Petaluma, and having more of the affordable housing with the first-time home buyers. Another thing that we have to look at for housing downtown is like what we did with the Philip Swede School. We took an existing older building and made it, I believe they're condos, so they are for sale. So that's a great first-time home buyers if they can afford it. But if we do, tongue in cheek there. Anyway, those are things that I would like to look at is existing buildings that could be renovated and used for affordable housing in our downtown area. And then in my district, which is Southeast Petaluma, we have to travel pretty far for our services. The Luma Go doesn't even come to my area. There's not a lot there but housing. And it was because it was built during the 60s and 70s when families needed housing, and they just started building, and then the schools went into double session, and the rest is history. But anyway, we want to think ahead to the needs in 20 to 25 years. I think we did a really good job 20 years ago. And then I even dug out look at how small this is. This was from 1987 to 2005. And I think our land use is all this size right now. So the staff has done an excellent job, but I'd like to see it go a little bit farther, especially when it comes to those 15-minute cities, communities and neighborhoods, and what we can do to utilize existing buildings. There was that community event, the Know Before You Grow presented, and that showed inner cities using it for not just housing, but mixed use. Thanks.
Thank you. I'd like to just appreciate what some of the comments you just made. I know we heard the other day that Sonoma County is already 28% over 60 years old, and whatever the county does, we try and overachieve. So I'm sure we're over that statistic, and that they feel that we're a third over 60 by 2030. So I mean, we are aging, and it shows up. A lot of that is house price related, and why young people don't move here, which is sad. I also wanted to plus the factory outlets being just a horrible place for housing, and not just because it floods. I mean, that should be enough, but also it's a detached element of what we're doing, and I don't see allowing that island to exist if the corridor doesn't precede it. And so, I mean, we talk about the whole corridor, maybe someday something, but I wouldn't include the outlet till after that. On the other hand, the housing ideas on existing shopping centers, those are great ideas to mix use on all the policies that are supporting that. Really liking those, but I'm kind of tossed about the 15-minute neighborhood. I very much like the idea of the walkability part and the accessibility part, but I think we're overselling what services could ever be within your 15 minutes. You know, we're hoping that we can get everywhere by walking, but we should better define what part of your day is within 15 minutes rather than blanketly offering that your life could be with a 15-minute neighborhood. I think it just needs clarification. I don't think the idea is wrong. I'm very hopeful on the idea that we can get around like that. And in the question about what should be prioritized, I think the only thing we can prioritize is what we have control over. So when we talk about the park type things and improving a park amenity at 15-minute, those ones are within our control, and we need to go for it. But the ones that, and actually, I think some of the 15-minute went sideways to include so much housing in the 15-minute. I think, you know, the idea of getting a bodega somewhere, getting something, some development somewhere is more possible than adding 4 stories into a neighborhood. You know, I think we might throw out the 15-minute part because the development part doesn't work. But we have to write policies to allow for both. But we can't oversell what the 15-minute could be. And I think I would love to lead with something to the effect of the growth we see is at a certain rate, and all the problems we see are from the existing environment. Who we are now is what we're trying to change. Development is only changing some small portion of it. And I know at planning they talked about this, is that maybe city capital projects is what's going to achieve all this great vision. You know, if we build a corridor into the city, then all architecture that flows from what we built would be cool. But I think we need to tell people that the general plan housing part is different than their unhappiness with the existing part. You know, people came to us with vision of what to change that doesn't work today, but it has to be funded by the people of today. And so I don't see that being highlighted quite enough. There was discussions of corridors. I would love if the corridors were a little more called out. Casa Grande, Eli, Caulfield as areas of tremendous improvement. Because if we do improvement in those areas, then maybe we get the 15-minute thing going with, I mean, the synergy between those ideas is strong. And as the report notes, there are certain things that are in contradiction to each other in policies or in tone. Like it says we should incentivize river development, and it says we should protect the river from development. So, I mean, it's absolutely appropriate where specific, but more caveats should be made when those things come up. And a legitimate question for planning. I was looking at MU1 and MU2. They have an FAR of 2.5 and a density of 30, but one says it could be 4 stories and one says it could be 2 stories. That seems like a disconnect to me. How does it work to have 2 zonings that have the same density and different story heights?
If you don't mind, can we hold that for when we come back? Because part of what we want to come back to you to is some revisions to the designations and the associated standards based on some of the feedback we got, and then specifically where those different designations are appropriate to be applied across
the other one to
city.
tag into that is density a range? Is there a min and a max? I mean, is that new, a min and a max? I mean, before didn't we just have a max? Or
We currently have, most of our zones have a minimum and a maximum. Some of our mixed use doesn't have a minimum, but has a maximum, except for when you're in the smart code area, and then there's no maximum. So we've got we've got a lot of different versions of it. And this is exactly what we've been spending a lot of time talking with the General Plan Advisory Committee about is, do you have minimums and maximums? Do you only have one? Do you do FAR for, the whole, all land uses combined, or is it just the commercial portion? Or, so this is a lot of what we dug in deep with the General Plan Advisory Committee in discussions with them.
Thank you. Yeah. Another thing I see is with all this vision, it's usually based on one's own perspective from where they stand. And one comment to that is equity is mentioned in one place and not in all places. I'd like to kind of make it more understood that that's underlying everything, and equity and access, and punching it up in one place minimizes it for the other places, and I didn't like that. More on that perspective. There's a lot of conversation about, well, this is a single family housing existing development, but throughout the West Side, it's so mixed up with apartment complexes that are gone, duplexes and splits and whatnot. Do we have, or could we have, like something of a heat map that shows, where the multifamily is and how blended it is? Is there a graphic? Because I think people would appreciate a graphic of that kind of, over the years we haven't only done one thing, but maybe since the 80s we've only done one thing. So, and I think I'm having too much fun and should pass over to the Vice Mayor for a minute.
Dennis turn first.
Oh, sorry, I saw your hand waving. Yeah, Councilmember Posake.
Sorry, once you got halfway over here, I didn't think that I needed to raise my hand or anything, so I'm sorry. Yeah, I tried to think mostly in terms of the policies, and I think the policies in general are great. I don't have many concerns about the policies. I like the frequency of calling for flexibility and diversity, and I think it's good that I don't feel that you or anyone who's writing part of this is locking us into whether it is activity centers or town centers 50. I'm sure in the end we'll have at least one of each of these things that we that we feel makes that definition, and probably more, but I'd hate to lock us into anything. I think I think part of that is the concerns that I think the mayor mentioned about, we had some 15-minute centers some years ago that were lost to Safeway or such. And I don't think it's going to work everywhere, but I think it's worthy of trying. And again, flexibility above all. I don't think, and I don't mean to demean the planning profession, but where we end up even 10 years from now, never mind 25, is I think very hard to predict. Depends on so many things out of our control, as people have mentioned, in terms of state laws and what else happens in the world. I like the policies. I don't get into any concerns until I get into the goals, if you will, and I just I'm happy every time I see the words flexibility and diversity, so that we can be prepared for a little better for whatever happens. Thanks.
You make a good point about the 15-minute neighborhoods. Now that 7-Eleven has closed so many, including my 15-minute neighborhood, they, that really changes the mix of what we think is feasible or commercially viable. Back to you.
Thank you. One of my concerns that have risen over time, because I'm also on the Climate Action Commission, and I've been studying climate change a long time. And I really like the blueprint that we have now. That's very, it's really almost over the top as expectations and goals. It's really a good and high, very, very high expectations. It's pioneering, as one person put it. And at the same time, I'm looking at our general plan, which is in a different way, also pioneering and doing various things. My concern is a mismatch in how our general plan will actually reach the climate action goals that we set in our framework for that. So there is, because I see what's happening is with our general plan, where it's almost like climate light, not really climate pioneering. And if we have the frameworks, what we want to do or in the blueprint now, that we want to be pioneering in this and getting those policies integrated enough so that we actually reach the goals that we are setting for ourselves for climate actions, that the general policy or the general plan is nowhere near that. That's my major concern, is that we can do everything in the general plan, we still don't reach our climate goals because it's not enough. So I see a little mismatch between the two. And so I'm concerned when you try to take one and integrate it in and say, so how can we actually get to a general plan that will actually accomplish the 85% reduction in vehicle miles traveled by gas guzzling cars within 10, 15 years in our general plan, which is for 25 years. So that's a huge mismatch. And so that's one of my concerns, is that we're setting ourselves up for failure rather than saying, okay, there seems to be some practicalities as well as some pioneering goal reaching. But we need to see it blended, and it's going to be very, very difficult, I think, for you guys to put those two together properly. So anyway, I just want to hear back your response to that.
It's a tall order, that's for sure. And no offense taken, Councilmember Posake, just about planning being imperfect. I mean, the best laid plans sometimes don't always come to fruition, but we want to feel good about the process. And make sure that we're being responsive to the community and council. So Vice Mayor, just to your question, that's the reason why the blueprint is somewhat a little bit further along, is we wanted to get the blueprint in front of council and in front of all of our stakeholders, so that, you know, we understand the urgency and the priority to get our climate objectives and policies correct and you know, get the ball rolling. And so this next iteration, so we're through the joint hearing on the draft, and so we're coming to council shortly. The idea on the marrying of efforts, so that's our climate action plan. General plan does absolutely take that into consideration and incorporates the plan, and then ultimately the environmental impact report is going to pull climate action with our general plan. But that, again, that's why we want to have that important discussion on the blueprint ahead, so that when, you know, as we're finalizing the land use map, which is expected to come to you early next year, it's going to be informed by what council discusses with respect to climate. And so all the things about VMT, level of service, these are really critical to you know, walking the walk, talking the talk. And so if we feel like we want to hit this objective, 75%, 80% reduction, our policies, to your point, need to match that, right? And so we're excited to have that conversation, and it's absolutely going to help inform where what I think will be the greenest general plan that we have, maybe the greenest around the region as well, if this council has anything to say about it. And so we'll make sure that we're teeing up much of this land use discussion, general plan discussion, with the context of our climate goals.
Thank you. It is going to be probably one of the biggest challenge I see moving forward is getting those two actually matched up, along with all the other goals we set in for housing and everything else. So anyway, I'm looking forward to that, and I really look forward to the work with you.
Councilmember Cater Thompson.
I just want to make a couple comments because I went back on my other notes. You know, as far as the factory outlet, absolutely no housing should be there, but there are opportunities there. And I'm talking the long-term opportunities. If we end up with a greenway and end up with connections from the wastewater treatment facility to the river park and then fairgrounds and then all the way up north with the, what I call the Corona Reach, but the greenway, you know, up by the factory outlet, there might be opportunities for an environmental center. You know, eventually things may change there. And so I wouldn't want to throw that out. But also, you know, the possibility of like yurts there, you know, just that you can't, that aren't going to flood, because we're going to have more and more people using these areas for interconnective trails and biking and probably hiking, because they'll eventually go somewhere. But the other thing is, off on Councilmember Now, you know, when we're talking, you know, when the east side was built, when the west side was built, you had Wickersham Park, you had McNear Park, you had all these parks that were integrated in the neighborhood, and the backyards were a lot smaller in certain areas. And when the east side was developed, it was after World War II. They started developing because of Hamilton, and they just built cookie cutter houses with 0 parks in there. And that's why I see the opportunity with the greenway and everything. It's like the hub of the city, really, for space for people to actually go to, because we don't have those parks. And then when parks were finally integrated in there, it was a great thing, but there are a majority of people on the east side that have no access to a neighborhood park unless it's at a school, and a lot of times those aren't even opened. So, and that goes to just the importance of any development, that we really need to look at the bigger picture of where the activities are going to be. And then the other thing is, especially on the east side of town, I mean, all the roads were built like freeways or highways. They're 4 lanes, and people are just constantly speeding, and that's what we have to deal with. And so you want to talk about getting to a 15-minute neighborhood center. To get to, like, you know, Deer Creek, you have to cross McDowell. It's not inviting. And so we have created our town that is not inviting for people to actually walk to neighborhood centers everywhere. And then when these centers were also built, Deer Creek, it is 100% auto-centric. There's really no sidewalks for the public. And then the housing was retrofitted. So how do we go to a shopping center that was built not that many years ago? And this was completely excluded, that there was any connection with the neighborhoods. How do you make those healthier today? And that goes with the Target Center, the same problem, totally auto-centric. And so we have created this problem, but well past, you know, maybe people weren't part of the factory outlet, but they certainly were part of the Target Center and Deer Creek, and that wasn't that many years ago. And so it's like we're trying to unwind the problems of the past. And to me, it's really important that people have spaces, and not huge yards, but actually spaces to integrate. And then, and it's the same thing, it really started in the 1960s with the Payran area in Midtown, no park areas. And that's where it really started, was the early 1960s. And then it went to, as the East Side was created also. I'm going to just see if there's other notes. And as far as 15-minute neighborhoods, I mean, they could be as simple as a pop-up for like a Jupiter Foods. I mean, they can be really simple. They don't actually have to be like a building that you're going into. There's all kinds of opportunities, farmers markets, you know, just different things. And I'm looking at my notes, but I really do think a huge problem is the East Side has highways, and how do we address, you know, that and really look at it? Because nobody seems to like, you know, reduction of lanes, but nobody really wants people going 60 miles an hour when there's homes on these streets, and that is what's happening every single day. And that, how the active transportation plan really integrates with this, but it goes back to safety about getting across these roads. Hang on, got some couple other notes. The gateway into our cities. I think it's really important that we look at the gateway into our city, and I look at Petaluma Boulevard and I look at Washington Street, and they're filled with blight. And that's not what our town should be, especially when you're going into the downtown. That's not appealing. And our streetscapes need to be different, so it feels inviting. With the when I'm on the planning commission, Roger, Commissioner, I always say his last name wrong, so I'll call him Roger. He always talks about this, and he and I really sat down and talked about it to really bring in, what do you really mean by it? And it's really making it just inviting coming into your city, shading so people feel like they want to walk and that people aren't going to be hit by cars. And then the beauty of coming into the town also, we have to open our eyes. It's not just the historic district in downtown, it's when you're coming into the town what you're also seeing and the opportunities we have in those areas. So that's it.
Councilmember Barnacle?
Yeah, just a few things that popped into my mind. I agree the long-term housing needs. I would like it to be not so focused on state mandates, but more based on values. Mm-hmm. I think we need to consider the role of design review as we think about policies in here too, especially with more infill happening. Having professional design review, I think, is going to be critical for not just the aesthetics of the buildings, but the sort of functional aspects of how they fit into the urban fabric. I'd like to see more on the way of incentives for things like shopping centers, where we know right now there's you know, we're not seeing it. There's, you know, it's hard to make the connection from what we say we want to what might happen is there. And I'd like to see some thoughts about incentives. And then I think it's worth it to look at some of the stalled projects like 131 Liberty, 890 Petaluma Boulevard, Haystack, and find out what actually is limiting them, because when we entitle projects and they don't get built, we don't get the benefits of it. And that I think we need to learn from that and make sure that we don't repeat that, so that we don't continue to create prohibitive zoning. And then the second thing is just small lot strategies. It feels like that's where we're going to see, some of the thickening happening, and it's a different style of development. It needs more flexibility to what Councilmember Postake was talking about. I think I'd like to see some emphasis on that, just so that we start to actually encourage some of that. That's how you get local development too, right? And local developers is to encourage that small lot stuff. Thanks.
Thanks. I think now we'll take a minute and we'll go to public comment. Appreciate everybody being so patient to get to public comment on this item, and then we'll bring it back to council for one more bite of the apple. But have we received anything by email?
We have not. But
not?
if we do, we will post it online.
Okay. And please open the...
Sure. Members of the public attending in person should bring their speaker cards to the clerk's desk if they have not already done so. Speakers are reminded to be respectful in their comments and that this meeting is being translated. Please pause between sentences for translation. The timer behind the dais will be reset for each speaker.
We have two cards tonight. Omar Lopez to be followed by Robert Hansen.
Good evening, Mayor McDonald, council members and staff. My name is Omar Lopez. I'm the Senior Program Associate at Generation Housing. I am happy to say that the majority of new policies outlined in the policy framework align with Generation Housing's mission to foster vibrant, equitable communities with diverse housing options. So I just wanted to highlight a few things that we really appreciated. Obviously, infill development is incredibly important, especially when you're locked by your growth boundary. We really appreciated the completed neighborhoods, which prioritizes the creation of neighborhoods where residents can meet their daily needs locally. And this supports our goal of fostering housing diversity and affordability in walkable mixed-use communities. And of course, as it was noticed, this contributes to reducing vehicle miles traveled and enhances community resilience by reducing the need of a vehicle while making your daily sort of motions. You guys did bring up a really fair point about 15-minute cities. They're not perfect. They're not going to solve everything. And so I think it's fair to acknowledge that and to make sure that we're not false advertising what we're promising, especially based on current economic situations where we can't promise as much as we really want to. But we do want to highlight corridor development. So a lot of these corridors, especially in Petaluma, have existing infrastructure, especially transit infrastructure. And so that's a really good way of sort of building where it's easy to build. And you don't have to worry about adding as much infrastructure after the fact. And again, that aligns with, reducing vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas reduction. And so that's something we want to encourage you guys to continue looking at. And lastly, I want to bring up zoning flexibility. So obviously, you guys have added a lot of, especially mixed use zoning. You've expanded that a lot. You've added a new category into residential zoning. And so we really appreciate these changes. And I think these will allow for better development within Petaluma. There's always so much more that can be done. And so if you can fit it in there, fit it in there. But we appreciate the work that's been done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Robert Hansen.
Good evening, everybody. I've learned a lot sitting here tonight. My card went in when you were discussing the excess clean rainwater, how to get rid of it, how to dispose of it. And nobody came up with the idea of funneling that back into our aquifer, which is both low and polluted. It's time we flush it out. And clean rainwater is the answer to that. Yet I didn't hear that being discussed. Just a thought. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you very much. And I believe we're closing public comment for the evening. No, we may have one more public comment for the evening, or two.
Seating time.
I just wanted to say that I didn't know we were going to be able to speak, so I didn't think about that. But I think the idea of walking, I think walking is highly underrated. And I mean, in 1993, when I was the first, it was the first pedestrian bicycle plan of the town we wrote. But my interest at that time was more pedestrian. And there were walkways that have subsequently been developed and there's no longer. We were trying to get a walkway from what is now Restridge, which wasn't there yet, to a commonly used corridor over the hill down to McNear School. There were lots of things like that in town. There was a guy named, I forget his name, but he was a planner in the planning department who said he'd written an entire bike plan and pedestrian plan to go along the rivers in the east side as a contract planner. And he said, it was just put on a shelf and it wasn't built that way. So I think we need to think about any development that's built. We need to have pedestrian cut-throughs that are built in it so people can know what they're getting into. And the idea of making green space available, I agree, it's very important. So the other thing about pedestrian walkways is that there are no regulations about LED lights, which now shine everywhere on sidewalks in your eyes, and that needs to be eliminated. Planners need to look at the lighting because LED lights are glaring. I live near 2nd Street, and where the quilt shop is, the parking lot right there, I mean, they put in the new lights. I don't even walk on that side of the street at night anymore, home from the movies. And that is not regulated. That is totally wrong. People need to have lights that go on and off and not shine all night long. I mean, not to mention the dark skies problem for astronomy people. But this is a pedestrian problem, which we don't look at all. And I'd really love to see that be included in the plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that our last speaker? Wonderful. That closes public comment, and I'd like to bring it back up to council for any last thoughts to add into here. And let me start at the end with Councilmember Barnacle and come across the dais.
Yeah, I'll emphasize the pedestrian access. I think we're looking at with like the Creekwood project right now where pedestrian access is like, where should it be? And does it even need to be there? And things like that. So to the extent that we can identify where we would want to see pedestrian access and it can be part of our plan so that it's not an if, but like where and it's part of the plan, that'd be great to think about that. And then I don't know, I know we've done some visioning and things like that, but I'll send some notes afterwards, but I just think there's like how important is this to you that we can do to just sort of get the community to articulate their values? Because I think it's going to be critical when we come back up here and we're asking and asked to make tough decisions about land use. Like, for example, around climate, how important is this to you? And we want to be able to reflect back on what the community's values are so that we're rooting our decisions in that. And so I think there's an opportunity for a survey of some sort to really sort of like capture values. And I think it'd be great to share with people too. So thanks.
Councilmember Cater-Thompson.
I just want to comment on Patricia Tuttle Brown's comment on the connections, because I remember that connection very well and where it was, and it would have been a great connection for kids to get to school. And so that's something that's really lost. And then, we built all these cul-de-sacs, and how do you get out of a cul-de-sac? You go right, left until you finally get out of it. And there are no walkways to get out. You just feel really isolated and stuck. And so I do think it's really important because, boy, I remember that project, and boy, it would be great today if that had moved forward. So thank you for bringing up the connective trails.
Councilmember Schritz, anything to add tonight?
Yeah, I just want to thank staff for all the work that you've done so far and where we're going with this step by step. I think it's a wonderful process that we're going through, especially engaging as much community as we have in this round as compared to what has been happening in the past. Just want to make a comment. I think Robert Hansen mentioned talking about water, aquifers, and groundwater. And having been on the Groundwater Sustainability Advisory Committee for a couple of years and following what they're doing now, just in response, just so folks know that we are taking lots of strides in monitoring our groundwater and looking at how to keep it preserved and actually looking at putting clean rainwater down in the ground for use later. So there is a huge master plan already in place that we're going to be following up with so that we will have a lot more clean groundwater to use for drinking in case we end up with a very long-term drought. So that's part of the plan we have for climate action. So I just want to mention that we have things in the works for these areas. And as I mentioned earlier, integrating that, the pedestrian bike reports that are coming in, getting that plan integrated in. So yeah, you guys have the challenge of integrating all these frameworks from different subject areas, and I think it's a tremendous opportunity as well as a challenge. So I'm looking forward to that. Thank you.
And I did appreciate that the PBAC now has a trails subcommittee. That's pretty cool, as an ad hoc. Councilmember Healy, anything?
Yeah, just to play off of Councilmember Shrib's comments, I think injection wells are going to be something that we're going to be spending more time thinking about in the future, and it could be flood water, it could be aqueduct water. The Sonoma County Water Agency has gotten funding for, they have 3 wells in the Santa Rosa Plain where they're going to be re-injecting aqueduct water during high peak flows in the Russian River. So, whether that makes more sense or flood water here makes more sense, I think we should be looking at both, but definitely that's something we want to be looking at. That's probably way down in the weeds for where you are right now, but just coming a track.
Councilmember Down?
This is, I'm not sure if it's a question or comment or statement, but in my district, to connect it to a 15-minute destination, we have a pedestrian overcrossing that goes over the freeway to lots of opportunities in the Target Shopping Center from the Kresge neighborhood, and we just have to fix it. So we really need to think ahead to what our plan is to working with Caltrans to getting that ADA and more modern for more people to utilize bikes and pedestrians. And that would really encourage that neighborhood to maybe get out of their vehicles and go across town to the fairgrounds, the Target Shopping Center. There's lots over there. They could even catch Luma Go. Did I say that before? Anyway, for long-term housing needs, I think it was Councilmember Barnacle that brought it up. We have to think about those first-time homebuyers and get creative. They may not want a yard. They may want to be in something that was an old building, like the Phillips Swede School. So we need to think about affordable housing in some of those areas. And our seniors, I'm in that category. Empty nesters, we don't want 2,000 square feet and a huge yard front and back anymore. It's a lot of work. So we want to downsize, but we want something one level, and we want something near those 15-minute centers. But we also want recreation. So over on the west side, over in the old Town and Country Shopping Center where we built some apartments and some low-cost housing, there's no parks right there. It always disappointed me that there's no recreation for those families. And we also want affordable housing for our city employees, our school employees. So we have to think about what their needs are. And maybe we should ask them, do you want to live downtown, or do you want to live out in the areas that have been built up? There's also a lot of vacant houses in my district that they're just empty because someone passed away and the families inherited them, and we have to figure out a way to incentivize them to selling it to maybe the first-time home buyers. One of the houses went on the market in my neighborhood, and there was a huge open house over the weekend, and it was very affordable, but it doesn't have any upgrades. It's totally 1965. The last time we did the general plan, I brought it with me, we were really talking a lot about the SMART code, and I heard it brought up tonight. And we were talking about the SMART code in the land that is currently next to, is where Oyster Cove's going to go in. So is that Weller Street? That it used to be owned by Dr. Pittler's. Anyway, I was going to be a development. It was going to be a mixed use. I'd love to see where that's at, if we still use that SMART code for future developments. And those housing needs, because that would be great housing with some mixed use like we did in the theater district. And I also asked about the Central Pacific Plan because we used that as a Bible when we did the last general plan. So I'd like to see that talked about more because we really mapped out everything from the river and we've changed a lot. We've developed a lot since we developed that plan, but that was the last time I was working on the general plan. So I'm trying to research where we're at now and compare it to what we already have on the books. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Posake? I just have kind of one question that maybe somebody can help me with in terms of as we talk more about design standards, which at least in my mind, the tighter you get with those, the more you get to qualitative stuff, and you get to a place where, trying to think of a different word than NIMBYs, can perhaps utilize that to stop pretty much all projects together. Am I wrong to think that that's a concern?
It's my concern.
Yeah, I think we all have an opinion, so we'll leave it as opinions. And I think there's too much and too little. Like if you don't, so finding the sweet spot is why we have professional planners to take the heat for it. No, I mean to figure that issue out. But yeah, and being somebody that spends more time than most thinking about affordable housing, I think about that. Again, that's I guess just get back. That's my big thing. Call it affordable, call it something else, but something that everyone can have a roof. That's all.
Can I just add something to that? One of the things we need to be very conscious of is with all of the state mandated streamlining, there are a lot of projects that the only thing we will be able to require are the objective design standards. So when you have a project that meets certain criteria, if you have qualitative design, we will not be able to. So we're at a really key spot where we need to, and we did this some with our objective design standards that the council adopted, but I think that will be something we'll probably look at revisiting and expanding to make sure that we are getting the design that the community wants without it being unduly burdened on getting the affordable housing we want too.
And I'll just add on that because the state shares the concern that you have, Councilmember Posake, and that Councilmember Barnacle was mentioning. So the trick is going to be to try to provide objective standards that are meaningful in terms of quality projects, but aren't susceptible to abuse. So, thanks.
Councilmember Healy?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Danley, for raising that. Did the state just pass legislation that kind of undermined our objective design standards for ministerial approved projects? Or did am I misinterpreting?
I'm sorry, did you say that undermined?
Yeah, the what we did recently.
Not that I'm aware of, but it's still possible because there's so many new housing.
Yeah, they're very busy. I thought I heard that somewhere. Thank you.
We'll check. We'll look for that and report back to the council. Not that I'm aware of, though.
Kater Thompson?
I just want to kind of follow up on Councilmember Now about the crossings. Like the Target crossing, that's another example of something that was built, early on, and the neighborhood, the way it was built, you can't really expand that. And for ADA, you may have to do a lift, and then you're looking at lifts and seeing how possible those are and maintenance of lifts. And so the Target Center, it is being looked at, and it's a lot more complicated than I thought it was going to be, because I've seen a few different designs on that because with the SCTA, but also the Corona overcrossing, they're looking at doing a cantilever separate to separate the bikes and pedestrians instead of just changing the entire structure. But I also have a concern because when that was done in the 1970s, the bridge going over the river is pretty low and it floods now, where it didn't originally. So that's a concern. And so here we're looking at maybe just doing a cantilever, but then I look at the bigger picture of the flooding and that bridge and that it really needs to be raised. And so, that's a long-term, that's a real concern. And then also we're looking at with Lakeville, how do you get across Lakeville so you're actually connecting to the river park and you're connecting to Schollenberger and the Ellis Creek. And so there is a plan. And so we have plans for these things, but it's really the cost. But like Corona is looking at maybe 2030. But is that really the right way to go? Or is it better just to redo a structure too? And it ties into flooding, which is, what we talked about earlier. So there are a lot of things that are going on, but then it's kind of like parks. You didn't put parks in. How do you put a park in? And then how are you going to get those activities? So it feels like a neighborhood. And so these are a lot of challenges.
I think that's the common thread.
Isn't it? It is a common thread. Absolutely.
Councilmember Barnacle, you're good. I just want to add, there was a quote from Jen H's Housing Summit this past weekend, and it was something to the effect of housing would be resolved a lot quicker if we were the unhoused folks, and that would be your motive. We'd be more motivated to get more work done more quickly. I also want to note that I read the word promote within the goals quite often, or facilitate, and to me those means the city's putting money in to make a thing go forward rather than the development would put. It's like putting our cash on the table for those, and many of the projects that we need cash for, and I think the only way we get our vision is to have a more robust economy, putting more money into the city coffers so the city can do the things the people is demanding to do. And I think the staff have what it was looking for tonight. Do you have more than you need? Okay. So if we're good at a staff level and we're good at a council level, then this item is complete.
One more thing.
All right.
Yeah, I think the economics of land use needs to be looked at, and we need to have some thoughts in there around that. Right, like we know that the economics of sprawl are terrible, and we know that the economics of infill are much better. It would be great to embed something in our policy around that, because it's never really talked about. It's always on the council's mind of why we support a project or not. The current overlay is and the hotel that comes with that is the perfect example where we're talking about turning a piece of property that generates nothing for our businesses and nothing for our city into the most economically productive piece of property in our whole city. And it's nowhere in our staff reports because it's not part of our current policy makeup. And I'd love to see some sort of policy discussion or policies in there that's like we encourage like economically vibrant projects and economically viable projects for the city and for our business community. So thanks.
Okay. Vice Mayor.
Just one more thing to add. Just want to emphasize something that was mentioned earlier and make sure you caught it and put some priority on it. And that's ground truthing the possibilities. We have a huge amount of possibilities, opportunities in front of us. And a lot of suggestions are embedded in the pathways, the bikeways, the housing, the use of the shopping centers, how it is. And so far, we've been very creative in what's possible. But before we actually get to the next step, ground truthing with the actual stakeholders on those pieces of land, owners and business people, property owners and business people included on that, as well as the developers. Is this plan going to be practical and possible from their point of view? So I'm looking for some ground truthing earlier rather than later, so we get that done.
Great. And Kater Thompson?
Quick comment off what Councilmember Shrib said. But sometimes I understand what you're saying, but sometimes I'm looking into the future, and there might be different property owners for some of those centers. And so they may actually really like to have some of the, the mixed use and other elements suggested. And so I don't look at it as just today. I look at it for the entire general plan. So.
Right. That's the thing with the general plan. There is no one specific answer for every single question. But at 8:35, we are adjourned. Thank you for the great presentation, staff.